The contract was absurd. 3 pages of standard legal boilerplate regarding damages and deposits, followed by a single, bolded addendum that felt less like a clause and more like a tombstone engraving. The tenant acknowledges that the landlord holds no liability for occupancy beyond the hour of 0300 hours. Total vacating of the premises is recommended nightly. Stay at your own risk. I signed it with a flourish of my pen, the skepticism practically leaking out of the ink. I am, or was, an investigative journalist specializing in the debunking of urban legends. I had slept in abandoned asylums in West Virginia, spent a week in the suicide forests of Japan, and held seances in the catacombs of Paris. I had never seen a ghost. I had never felt a cold spot that wasn't a draft, nor heard a voice that wasn't settling wood. 14 Blackwood Lane was just another job. It was to be the centerpiece of my book, The Architecture of Fear. The house stood in a forgotten cul-de-sac on the outskirts of London, a towering Victorian structure of soot-stained brick and weeping mortar. It looked like a bruise against the gray sky. It was narrow, impossibly so, squeezing upward between 2 derelict warehouses as if gasping for air. The windows were tall and thin, resembling closed eyes. As I unlocked the front door, the heavy oak groaning against the rusted hinges, I checked my watch. 4 p.m. I had 11 hours and 17 minutes until the witching hour. The legend was specific. It wasn't that people died at 3:17 a.m., it's that they ceased. They vanished. No struggle, no blood, no packed bags. Just gone. The police files I'd bribed my way into were maddeningly empty. 7 tenants in 10 years. All disappeared on their 3rd night exactly at 3:17 a.m. I intended to stay for 7. Upon entering, the smell hit me first. It wasn't rot or mildew, which I was accustomed to. It was the smell of ozone and stale electricity, like the air after a lightning strike, mixed with something copper-sharp. The hallway was long, lined with peeling wallpaper that depicted a repetitive, dizzying pattern of twisting vines that looked uncomfortably like veins. I set down my gear cases, hard-shell Pelicans loaded with the best sensory equipment money could buy. This wasn't a camping trip, it was a siege. I spent the first 4 hours mapping the house. 3 stories, a basement, and an attic sealed with nails so old they had fused with the wood. The geometry was subtle but wrong. The stairs tilted slightly to the left. The bedroom doorframe wasn't a perfect rectangle. It leaned, creating a subconscious sense of vertigo. It was a house designed to make you feel drunk. I set up base camp in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. It was the epicenter of the disappearances. I mounted wide-spectrum cameras in every corner, rigged motion sensors to the doors and windows, and placed digital voice recorders on the nightstand, the floor, and the windowsill. I taped a grid on the floor to measure any movement of objects. I was scientific, I was prepared, I was arrogant. The first night was a test of patience. I sat in a folding chair, drinking lukewarm coffee, watching the monitors. The silence of Blackwood Lane was absolute. No traffic, no wind, just the house settling. It sounded like a ship at sea, the timbers groaning under immense pressure. At 3 a.m., the atmosphere changed. It wasn't a temperature drop, it was a pressure shift. My ears popped. The air grew heavy, viscous, hard to pull into the lungs. I stared at the digital clock on my desk. 3:15, 3:16. I held my breath, waiting for the ghost, the demon, the intruder. 3:17 came. The numbers glowed red in the darkness. Nothing happened. 3:18. I let out a laugh, a sharp bark that sounded too loud in the empty room. Gotcha, I felt the whisper. I felt a surge of triumph. The legend was a lie. I went to sleep feeling like a king. The next morning, the sun didn't seem to rise so much as the gray simply got lighter. I reviewed the footage, 6 hours of static silence. But then I checked the audio waveform for 3:17 a.m. There was no audible sound, but the visual representation of the audio file showed a massive spike, a wall of noise that lasted exactly 60 seconds. It was a frequency below human hearing, infrasound. That explained the ear popping and the dread. The house was generating a resonant frequency that induced fear, a natural phenomenon likely caused by the wind through the chimneys or the plumbing. I spent the day writing, feeling smug. I began exploring the basement, a damp concrete box filled with the detritus of previous lives. Old chairs, damp boxes of books, a broken mirror. In the corner, I found a pile of shoes, just shoes. Left shoes, specifically. Dozens of them. It was odd, unsettling, but explainable, a fetish of a previous squatter, perhaps. Night 2. The air pressure shifted earlier, around 2:45 a.m. I felt a headache bloom behind my eyes, a sharp, rhythmic throbbing. I sat in the chair, camera in hand. This time, the silence was broken. At 3:10 a.m., I heard a sound from the floor above, the sealed attic. It sounded like marbles rolling across the floorboards. Clack, clack, roll. Then heavy footsteps. Not the creak of settling wood, but the distinct, measured pace of a man pacing. I grabbed the thermal camera and ran into the hallway. The ceiling above me showed nothing on the thermal imaging, cold blue. But the sound was there, heavy, physical thuds directly above my head. I shouted, "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. I looked at my watch, 3:16 a.m. I waited. The second hand swept past the 12, 3:17 a.m. The house screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a vibration that rattled my teeth and blurred my vision. The hallway stretched. I mean that literally. I watched the door to the bedroom recede, the hallway elongating like pulled taffy, the pattern on the wallpaper writhing. The distance between me and my safety doubled, then tripled. I stumbled, vertigo slamming into me. I fell to my knees, clutching the carpet. The air smelled of burning hair. Then, as the clock hit 3:18, the hallway snapped back to normal with a violent lurch that threw me against the wall. I lay there, panting, my nose bleeding. This was no infrasound. This was a manipulation of reality. Day 3 was a haze. I couldn't leave. I tried to walk to the front door, but every time I approached it, a wave of nausea so potent it buckled my knees washed over me. I was being digested. I realized that the house wasn't haunted, it was hungry. I spent the day tearing apart the library on the first floor. Behind a false panel in the wainscoting, I found a journal. It belonged to Elias Thorne, the tenant from 3 years ago. The handwriting started neat and devolved into frantic scratches. It's not the time that kills you, it's the geometry. The house folds. At 3:17, the angles add up to something other than 360. It opens a door. I saw him last night, the man in the wall. He's made of plaster and wire, and he wants my eyes. I read until my eyes burned. Elias had theorized that the house was built over a thin place, a rupture in the skin of the world. The architect, a man named Wickham, had been an occultist obsessed with non-Euclidean geometry. He built the house to function as a trap, a mechanism to catch something, and the tenants were the bait. Night 3. The third night was when they always vanished. I barricaded the bedroom door. I had a flare gun, a flashlight, and a bottle of whiskey. I sat in the center of the taped grid. 1 a.m. passed. 2 a.m. The house began to groan, a low, guttural sound that came from the walls themselves. The plaster began to sweat. Beads of viscous, dark liquid rolled down the floral patterns. At 3 a.m., the lights died. Not just the bulbs, but my battery-powered lanterns. The darkness was absolute, heavy, choking. I clicked the flare gun, my hands shaking. 3:15 a.m. The temperature plummeted. My breath hung in the air as ice crystals. I could hear breathing. It was coming from the corners of the room. Wet, ragged breathing. "Show yourself," I screamed, my voice cracking. 3:16 a.m. The walls dissolved. They didn't fall down. They became translucent, revealing the skeleton of the house. But instead of studs and beams, I saw ribs and muscle. The house was biological. Giant, pulsing veins pumped black sludge where the wiring should be. And beyond the walls, outside, was a void. No London, no street, just a swirling gray abyss filled with floating debris, clocks, chairs, bones. 3:17 a.m. The floor beneath me vanished. I didn't fall down. I fell through. I landed in a space that made no sense. It was a corridor, but it went in all directions simultaneously. Gravity was a suggestion. I floated, turning, screaming silently. Around me were the others,
the previous tenants. They were suspended in the air like insects in amber. They weren't dead. Their eyes were wide, moving, frantic. They were screaming, but no sound came out. They were trapped in a single second of time, 3:17 a.m., a loop of eternal terror. And I saw the architect, Wickham. He wasn't a man anymore. He was the center of the web, a mass of elongated limbs and geometry fused with the architecture. His face was the clock face, his hands the hands of time. He reached for me. I raised the flare gun and fired into the clock face. The red magnesium flare exploded in the gray void, blindingly bright. The creature shrieked, a sound of grinding metal. The loop stuttered. Reality flickered. I saw the bedroom floor again, then the void, then the floor. I clawed at the air, swimming through the distortion, grabbing the edge of the reality I knew. I pulled. My fingernails tore, but I pulled. The clock ticked, 3:18 a.m. I slammed onto the floorboards of the bedroom, vomiting bile and blood. The lights flickered on. The walls were solid plaster. The silence returned. I lay there until dawn, weeping. I left the house that morning. I left my equipment, my clothes, everything. I ran until I found a taxi on the main road. I never went back. I never wrote the book, but I know the truth now. The house is still there. It's waiting. And sometimes, when I look at a clock and see 3:17, I can feel the floor drop away. I can smell the ozone and the rot. I am free, but part of me, a shadow, an echo, is still trapped in that room, screaming in silence, forever waiting for the minute to end.
The house did not welcome me. It tolerated me, like a host enduring an unwanted guest because of blood ties. High atop the crags of Blackwood Ridge, the sprawling Victorian estate sat like a rotting tooth in a dying gum line, overlooking a town that had spent the last century trying to forget it existed. My grandfather, Elias Blackwood, had died 3 weeks ago, leaving me the sole heir to a fortune built on coal and cruelty, and this house, a monument to his paranoia. I hadn't set foot in the manor since I was 6 years old. That was 30 years ago. My memories were fragmented, hazy vignettes of dust motes dancing in shafts of cold light, the smell of old paper and pipe tobacco, and the door. Even now, standing in the grand foyer with my bags, the silence of the house pressing against my eardrums, my mind drifted to the door. It was in the pantry, behind a heavy oak shelf. I remembered the day the contractors came. I remembered the cement mixers, the heavy industrial chains, and the look on grandfather's face, a mixture of terrified relief and profound sorrow. They hadn't just locked the basement, they had entombed it. They poured concrete over the entrance, welded steel plates over that, and then stacked shelving in front of it, as if pretending the lower level of the house simply didn't exist. "Keep it closed, Thomas," his will had read, the handwriting shaky and desperate. "Whatever you do, let the concrete hold. The roots must not be disturbed." Naturally, human curiosity is a disease that festers in the face of prohibition. For the first week, I obeyed. I spent my time cataloging the library, arranging for the sale of the antique furniture, and trying to ignore the settling groans of the timber. But the house was alive with a peculiar energy. At night, lying in the master bedroom, I could hear a low-frequency thrumming, like the idling engine of a massive machine, vibrating through the floorboards. It wasn't the boiler. The heating system had been dead for years. It was coming from below. By the second week, the scratching started. It wasn't the scurrying of rats. It was slower, deliberate, long, wet drags against stone, muffled by feet of concrete. I tried to tell myself it was the pipes or the shifting foundation, but the dreams told me otherwise. In my sleep, I walked down corridors made of meat and bone, guided by a voice that sounded like my grandfather screaming underwater. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the taste of copper in my mouth, standing in the pantry, my hands pressed against the cold steel plate that covered the concrete seal. On the 15th day, I found the journal.
It was hidden inside a hollowed-out volume of an encyclopedia in the study. The entries were sporadic, descending from the meticulous notes of a businessman into the ravings of a lunatic. Elias wrote of the substrate, a geological anomaly he had discovered while expanding the wine cellar in 1993. He described it not as a cavern, but as an organ. He wrote of whispering walls, of geometry that shifted when you looked away, and of the things that had started to come up the stairs. The final entry, dated the day before the sealing, was a single scrawled line. God forgive me, I fed it to keep it quiet, but it is always hungry. That night, the thrumming became a roar. The floor of the pantry cracked. I stood there with a flashlight, watching a hairline fracture zigzag across the concrete slab I was sworn to protect. A smell leaked out, a thick, cloying scent of ozone, rot, and ancient stagnant water. It was the smell of a tomb that had been breathing. I needed to know. The madness of the isolation, combined with the rhythmic thumping from below, shattered my resolve. I went to the garage and retrieved a sledgehammer and a pickaxe. It took me 3 hours to break through the concrete. It was poor quality, brittle with age, or perhaps rotted from the inside by whatever dampness lay beneath. When I finally broke through the steel plate, the air that rushed out didn't just smell, it felt. It was a physical wave of cold, humid pressure that knocked the wind out of me. Below the jagged hole lay the original wooden stairs, surprisingly intact, swallowed by a darkness that my flashlight beam struggled to penetrate. I descended. The air grew heavier with each step, the temperature dropping until I could see my breath pluming before me in the LED beam. This was not a normal basement. The blueprints listed a wine cellar and a storage room. What I walked into was a labyrinth. The first chamber was mundane, which made it worse. It was a time capsule of 1994. Cardboard boxes labeled tax returns and winter clothes sat on metal shelves, but everything was covered in a thick gray slime, a fungal web that connected the boxes to the walls and the floor. I touched a box, and it disintegrated, revealing not clothes, but a mass of fused organic matter. Leather jackets melted into wool sweaters, colonized by vibrant, pulsing mold. I pushed deeper. The architecture began to fail. The hallway stretched too long, tilting at a subtle, nauseating angle. The walls changed from brick to rough-hewn bedrock, and then to something else, a smooth, dark material that felt like polished obsidian, but yielded slightly to the touch, like hardened cartilage. I found a door marked Authorized Personnel Only, a sign stolen from a factory, bolted to the rock. Behind it lay what looked like a surgical theater.
Rusted gurneys stood in a circle around a central drain. On the trays were tools that defied explanation, scalpels with curved, serrated blades, retractors meant for anatomy much larger than humans, and the jars. Rows and rows of mason jars lining the shelves, filled with cloudy formaldehyde. I wiped the dust from one. Inside floated a finger, but it had too many joints. Another jar held an eye the size of grapefruit, its pupil a horizontal slit. Grandfather hadn't just found something down here. He had been studying it, experimenting on it, or perhaps it had been experimenting on him. I found a tape recorder on a desk, the batteries miraculously preserving a sliver of charge. I hit play. Elias's voice, younger but strained, crackled out. Subject 4 has assimilated the biological matter. The walls are expanding. It mimics what it consumes. I saw my own face in the wall today. It spoke to me. I clicked it off, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned to leave, to flee back to the surface and pour fresh concrete, but the door was gone. Where the frame had been, the wall had knit itself together, a smooth patch of gray flesh stone. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I spun around. The only way was forward, deeper into the dark. The tunnel widened, opening into a vast subterranean cavern that shouldn't have been geologically possible beneath the manor. The ceiling was lost to shadow, but far above I heard the dripping of water, or something thicker. The floor was uneven, littered with what looked like white stones. As I walked, the crunching sound under my boots made me look down. They weren't stones. They were bones, thousands of them. Small animal bones mostly, but scattered among them were femurs and skulls that were unmistakably human. In the center of the cavern stood a structure that mocked the house above. It was a replica of the manor's foyer, built entirely of the black cartilaginous stone. It was a dollhouse for a giant, a mimicry of home. I walked through the open front door of the shadow house. Inside, the furniture was formed from the same black substance, fused to the floor, and sitting in the armchair facing the cold hearth was a figure. It was wearing my grandfather's smoking jacket, preserved against the rot. I approached slowly, the flashlight trembling in my hand. "Grandfather," I whispered. The figure didn't turn. I walked around to face it. It wasn't Elias. It was a husk. The skin was papery and translucent, stretched over a framework of black roots that had burst from within his body. His eyes were gone, replaced by glowing patches of bioluminescent fungus. But the mouth was moving, a low, wet mumble. "Thomas, you came. The seal broken." "What is this place?" I screamed, the sound deadened by the fleshy walls. "The stomach," the thing that was once Elias wheezed. "We are digestion." The house around me began to shudder. The walls of the Shadow Manor pulsed. Veins I hadn't noticed in the stone began to glow a sickly crimson. The floor beneath the armchair softened, turning into a quagmire of acid and mud. Elias's husk began to sink. "Run," he gurgled. "It wakes." A roar tore through the cavern, a sound so loud it vibrated my teeth. From the darkness beyond the shadow house, something massive shifted. I saw a limb, if you could call it that, slam down into the light. It was pale, wet and segmented, the size of a redwood trunk, tipped with grasping human-like fingers the size of a man. Then another limb, and another. A face pushed through the gloom, a nightmare amalgamation of every living thing the basement had consumed over 30 years. It had the eyes of a dog, the teeth of a shark, and the structure of a man, scaled up to godlike proportions. I ran. I didn't look for a path. I scrambled blindly through the bone fields, the creature crashing behind me, smashing the Shadow Manor to dust. The ground shook with every impact of its limbs. I found a narrow fissure in the rock, a throat-like passage leading upward. I squeezed inside just as a massive hand slammed against the opening, fingers raking the stone inches from my face. The climb was an agony of claustrophobia. The tunnel was tight, slick with slime, and it breathed. The walls expanded and contracted, squeezing me, pushing me back. I clawed my way up, my fingernails tearing, screaming into the dark. I could hear the creature howling below, a sound of frustration and hunger that promised eternal torment. After what felt like hours, I saw a grate above me. Light, dim moonlight filtered through. I pushed against it. It held. I battered it with the flashlight until the lens shattered, then with my fists. It gave way with a screech of rusted metal. I pulled myself up and collapsed onto wet grass. I was outside. Rain lashed against my face. I rolled over and looked at the house. The manor was groaning. The windows bulged outward as if filled with high pressure. The front door blew off its hinges and a slurry of black ichor vomited onto the porch. The basement wasn't just down there anymore. It was coming up. It was filling the house. I scrambled to my car, the keys fumbling in my bloody hands. As the engine roared to life, I looked back one last time. The house was changing. The roofline twisted, forming a jagged spine. The windows elongated into eyes. Blackwood Manor was standing up. I drove until the gas tank drew dry, and then I walked. I burned the deed, I changed my name, but it doesn't matter. Sometimes when I'm in a quiet room, I can hear it. The thrumming, the scratching from beneath the floorboards no matter where I am. We sealed it for 30 years, and in doing so, we let it ferment. We let it grow strong, and now I know the truth. The world is just a thin layer of skin over a hungry throat, and I have opened the mouth. I am a listener. That is the simplest title for a job that defies simple explanation. Officially, I am a quality assurance technician for a subcontracted data firm operating out of a sub-basement in Northern Virginia. Unofficially, I am a janitor for the collective nightmare of the human race. I scrub the timeline. I delete the impossible. Every day, millions of emergency calls flood the 911 networks across North America. Domestic disturbances, fires, heart attacks, cats in trees. 99.9% of them are mundane tragedies or false alarms. They are processed, recorded, and archived by standard dispatch centers. But there is a filter, an algorithmic sieve known as Project Echelon 9 that sits between the caller and the dispatch. It listens for specific keywords, specific frequencies, and biometric stress levels that shouldn't be humanly possible. When Echelon 9 catches one of these anomalies, it redirects the call here, to the black server, to me. My job is to listen, categorize, and usually delete. These are the calls that were never supposed to exist. I sit in a room that smells of ozone and stale coffee, illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of 3 monitors and the flickering LEDs of a server rack that hums like a dying hornet. The walls are soundproofed with acoustic foam, thick enough to muffle a gunshot or a scream. Tonight, the queue is heavy. The moon is full, the atmospheric pressure is dropping, and the boundaries between what is real and what is not are wearing thin. I adjust my headphones, the leather cracking against my ears. I take a sip of cold caffeine and click the first file. File ID 991A, Zeta. Timestamp 0333 AM, location redacted, Ohio. There is no static. That's the first bad sign. Digital lines usually have a noise floor, a gentle hiss of the universe existing. This line is dead silent, a vacuum of sound. Then, a voice. It sounds like wet gravel sliding down a metal chute. 911, what is your emergency? The automated dispatcher prompt asks. The prompt was triggered, but no human operator picked up. The sky is blinking, the caller says. It is a woman, elderly, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a terrible awe. Ma'am, do you require medical assistance? The bot asks. No, she whispers. You don't understand. The stars, they aren't gas, they are eyelids, and they are opening, all at once. They are looking at the house. The light, it's not light, it's milk. It's pouring through the chimney. I watch the waveform on my center monitor. It's spiking erratically, creating jagged red peaks that look like a mountain range in hell. In the background of the call, I hear sound, a low, rhythmic thumping. Thump, 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 like a heartbeat, but the size of a cathedral. It's beautiful, the woman says, her voice wet now, bubbling. The milk is warm. It tastes like memories. Then the sound of tearing, not fabric, but something denser, meat. The waveform flatlines instantly. I exhale, my breath visible in the chilled air of the server room. I tag the file. Class 4, hallucination, biohazard potential. I hit permadelete. The file vanishes. The Ohio woman never called. She likely died of a gas leak or a stroke. That is the official story. That is the truth I curate. I rub my eyes. The isolation of the bunker plays tricks on you. Sometimes I think I hear the thumping from the calls continuing in the silence of the room, vibrating through the floor tiles. I click the next file. File ID 772B Omega. Timestamp invalid. Dates reading 1924-11-14. Location mobile cell tower, Miami, Florida. The timestamp error is common. The system struggles to process temporal anomalies. I hit play. He's in the wires, a young man screams. The audio quality is atrocious, heavily distorted by what sounds like gale force winds. He's crawling through the fiber optics. I can see him in the modem lights. 911, state your location. The bot drones. Stop the data, unplug it. He's digitizing my fingers. Oh God, look at my hand. It's pixelating. It's distinct squares of... The scream that follows isn't human. It's a digital screech, the sound of a dial-up modem amplified to 140 decibels. It shifts pitch, rising higher and higher until it passes the range of human hearing, but I can still feel it in my teeth. The spectral analyzer on my screen shows a pattern in the noise. I lean in close. The frequency bars aren't random. They form a shape, a face, a screaming face embedded in the audio spectrum. I recoil, my chair rolling back across the concrete floor. I know that face. I saw it on the news 3 days ago. A missing persons case. A graphic designer who vanished from his apartment, leaving behind nothing but a pile of silica sand and a melted router. I delete the file. My hands are shaking. I shouldn't be seeing patterns. That's a symptom of exposure. We are supposed to rotate every 4 hours, but my relief Henderson didn't show up tonight. I'm on hour 9. The room feels smaller. The shadows in the corners of the server racks seem to stretch, reaching towards my desk like fingers of oil. I need to focus. File ID 0000, void. Timestamp present. I hesitate. The 000 prefix is reserved for internal routing. This call didn't come from outside. It came from inside the network. I click play. Silence. I turn the volume knob up. The gain hisses. Still silence. Then a sound so faint I almost miss it. Breathing. Slow, ragged breathing. It sounds wet, like someone breathing through a lung full of blood. Who is this? I whisper into my own mic, violating protocol. We never speak to the recordings. The recording shouldn't be able to answer. It's a static file, but the breathing stops. Arthur, the voice whispers. It sounds like me. I freeze. My heart hammers against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stare at the waveform. It's moving in sync with the voice, but the file duration is 0 seconds. It's not playing a recording. It's streaming. Arthur, don't turn around. I am paralyzed. The voice is coming from the headphones, but it sounds like it's originating from directly behind my chair. The air in the room drops 10 degrees in a second. I can see my breath clouding the monitors. You've been deleting the warnings, Arthur. My own voice says through the headset, thick with malice. The weeping mother, the pixelated man, they weren't glitches. They were the heralds. What do you want? I stammer, my hand hovering over the master kill switch that cuts power to the rack. We want to be heard. We want to be saved. You put us in the trash bin, Arthur. You sent us to the null space. Do you know what it's like in the data graveyard? It's cold. It's so crowded. I spin around in my chair. The room is empty. The heavy steel door is sealed shut. The fluorescent lights buzz aggressively. There is no one there. But the shadow cast by the server rack, the one in the far corner, is wrong. It doesn't match the object casting it. The rack is rectangular. The shadow is shaped like a man with too many limbs. I rip the headphones off and throw them onto the desk. They clatter loudly, but the voice continues, not from the cans, but from the room itself. It's vibrating out of the acoustic foam, out of the floorboards. You can't delete us anymore. I scramble for the phone, the hardline emergency phone connected directly to the upper levels. I lift the receiver. There is no dial tone, just the sound of that wet gravel voice from the first call. The sky is blinking, Arthur.
The old woman says. I slam the phone down. I need to leave. I grab my keycard and rush to the blast door. I swipe the card. The LED on the reader turns red. Access denied. I swipe again. Access denied. I pound on the steel. Let me out! Henderson, anyone! The monitors behind me flare to life. All 3 screens turn bright, blinding white. Then text begins to scroll, rapidly pouring down the screens like black rain. Incoming call. Incoming call. Incoming call. The speakers mounted on the wall explode with noise, a cacophony of 1,000 screams, a choir of the damned. It's every call I've ever deleted. I hear the man drowning in his own blood. I hear the child who claimed his dog was speaking Aramaic. I hear the woman who said her reflection walked away without her. They are all screaming my name. I fall to my knees, covering my ears, but the sound isn't acoustic, it's psychic.
It's drilling into the parietal lobe of my brain. The room begins to change. The acoustic foam on the walls starts to drip. It liquefies, turning into a thick black sludge that runs down to the floor. The smell hits me, rotting copper and ozone. The floor tiles crack, and from the fissures light bleeds out. Not electric light, but the milky, wrong light the woman described. I crawl back toward the desk, seeking cover under the console. The server rack, the black server, is smoking. The metal casing is glowing cherry red. It's melting. From the molten slag of the server, a hand emerges. It is made of wire and bone. It grips the edge of the desk. Then another hand. Then a head. It has no face, just a smooth surface of black glass reflecting the chaos of the room. It pulls itself free from the machinery, standing 7 feet tall, a golem of technology and hate. The screaming stops instantly. The silence is worse. The entity tilts its head. It points a jagged finger at the monitor. I look. The screen shows a live feed. It's a camera angle from the ceiling of this very room. I see myself cowering under the desk, and I see the entity standing over me. But in the video feed, the entity isn't a monster. It's Henderson. My relief. Henderson is standing there holding an axe, his face a mask of blank terror. Arthur, Jesus Christ, what are you doing to the server? Reality fractures. I look at the monster in the room. It's a shifting mass of glitching pixels and wire. I look at the screen. It's Henderson. You're not real. I scream at the monster. Neither are you, the monster replies. Its voice is the compilation of every deleted call. We checked the logs, Arthur. There is no employee named Arthur Pennahollen. There never was. My blood runs cold. I look at my hands. They are flickering, translucent. I can see the linoleum floor through my palms. No, I whisper. You are the Echelon 9 algorithm, the monster says, stepping closer. The heat radiating from it burns my skin, or what I thought was skin. Format C, the Henderson thing on the screen says. He raises the axe. The monster in the room raises a claw made of serrated hard drives. Wait! I scream. The axe comes down. The claw comes down. There is no pain, only a sudden shift in perspective. I am no longer in the room. I am everywhere. I am traveling through copper wire at the speed of light. I am a signal. I hear a ringtone. Bring, bring. Someone picks up. 911, what is your emergency? A bored dispatcher asks. I try to speak. I try to scream for help, but I have no mouth. I have only the data of 1,000 nightmares compressed into a single file. The sky, it's blinking, I hear myself say, but it's not my voice. It's the old woman's voice. Ma'am, stay on the line, the dispatcher says. I try to change the words. I try to say, I am Arthur. I exist. He's in the wires. My voice shifts to the screaming man. I am not the listener anymore. I am the call, and I am doomed to repeat this loop, jumping from tower to tower, phone to phone, terrifying strangers, begging to be deleted. I feel the algorithm watching me. A new listener, someone sitting in a dark room, smelling stale coffee, hovering their finger over the delete key. Please, I think, press it. Erase me. I hear the click. Darkness. But not oblivion, just the cold, crowded storage of the recycle bin. I am not alone here. The weeping mother is here. The pixelated man is here. They turn to me in the digital dark. Welcome back, Arthur, they say in unison. And then the ring tones again. The job listing was buried deep in the classifieds of a localized dark web forum, the kind of place you only looked when you owed money to people who owned pliers and blowtorches. It was succinct. Night Watchman, the Sterling Voss monolith. No experience required, $5,000 a week. Do not apply if you have a history of auditory hallucinations. I didn't have hallucinations, but I did have a debt that was going to get my legs broken in 3 days. I applied. The interview was a formality. It took place in a porta-cabin outside the perimeter fence. The man, Mr. Kellen, looked like he hadn't slept since the Nixon administration. He handed me a flashlight, a heavy iron keyring, and a thick binder bound in gray leather. "Don't open the doors on the 14th floor," he said, his eyes fixed on a stain on the carpet. "Don't look at the mirrors in the basement bathrooms for longer than 5 seconds. And if the elevator starts going up when you press down, lay flat on the floor and cover your head until it stops." I thought he was hazing me. I laughed. He didn't. He just handed me the badge and pointed to the structure looming behind him. The Sterling Voss monolith. It was a brutalist nightmare. A slab of windowless concrete rising 40 stories into the smog-choked sky, surrounded by acres of cracked asphalt. It looked less like a building and more like a tombstone for a giant. My first night began at 1900 hours. The lobby was a cavern of polished black granite and echoes. My footsteps sounded like gunshots. The security desk was an island in a sea of shadow. I settled in, reviewing the CCTV monitors. There were 60 screens, most showing static or empty, dust-choked corridors. The silence was heavy, physical. It pressed against my eardrums. I tried to read a book, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Around 200 hours, I started my first patrol. The binder, the rule book, stated I had to physically check the fire doors on every 5th floor. I took the service elevator. It smelled of ozone and copper. The mechanism groaned, the sound vibrating through the soles of my boots. I started on the 35th floor. It was an open-plan office, stripped bare. No desks, no chairs, just pillars of raw concrete and the stains of where carpet used to be. The dust was thick, undisturbed for years. Yet, as I walked, I smelled stale tobacco smoke. I swept my flashlight beam across the room. The light caught something in the far corner. A chair. A single wooden chair facing the corner of the room. I walked over to it. It was bolted to the floor. Scratched into the concrete wall at eye level for anyone sitting in it were the words, "It breathes when you sleep." A chill that had nothing to do with the drafty ventilation system ran down my spine. I turned to leave, and for a split second, my flashlight beam dragged across a shadow that seemed to detach itself from a pillar and slide into the darkness. I told myself it was just nerves. By night 3, the isolation was gnawing at me. The building groaned. Thermal expansion, Kellen had said, but concrete doesn't sound like weeping. I was in the control room, eating a cold sandwich, when monitor 14, showing the 14th floor hallway, flickered. The 14th floor I was forbidden to enter. The camera was grainy, black and white. In the center of the hallway, standing perfectly still, was a figure. It looked like a mannequin, smooth and featureless, but it was wearing a security uniform. My uniform. I grabbed the radio. "Hello? Who is this?" Silence. On the screen, the figure turned its head slowly toward the camera. It didn't have a face, just a smooth expanse of flesh. Then the camera feed cut to black. I sat there, heart hammering against my ribs, staring at the static. I checked the other screens. Empty, empty, empty. But when I looked back at the glass reflection of the control room, I swore I saw movement behind me. I spun around. Nothing but the lockers. Night 5 brought the silt. That's what the rulebook called it. If you encounter the silt, retreat immediately and seal the bulkhead. I found it on the 20th floor. I was doing a routine check when I stepped into a puddle. The roof wasn't leaking. I shone my light down. A black, viscous liquid was seeping out of the electrical sockets, pooling on the floor. It wasn't oil, it was too thick. It moved with a sluggish intentionality. As I watched, the puddle expanded, flowing toward my boots against the gradient of the floor. It was hunting me. I backed away, heart racing. The liquid surged, forming a pseudopod that lashed out like a whip. I slammed the fire door shut and spun the locking wheel. I could hear it slapping against the metal on the other side, wet and heavy. I ran back to the elevator, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I got back to the lobby, I checked the monitors. The 14th floor camera was obscured, covered in a thick layer of black slime. Week 2 was a descent into madness. I stopped sleeping during the days. The sun felt wrong, too bright, too artificial.
I only felt real inside the monolith. The building was changing. Corridors that should be straight curved imperceptibly. Stairs led to floors that weren't on the elevator panel. I found a room on the 8th floor that was fully furnished like a 1950s living room, pristine, with a TV playing static at full volume. There was a bowl of fresh apples on the table. I took a bite one. It tasted like ash. The auditory hallucinations started, or maybe they weren't hallucinations. I heard conversations behind the walls, muffled arguments, crying, the sound of a piano playing a discordant tune. I started talking back to them. "What do you want?" I screamed at the drywall on the 30th floor. "Let us out," a voice whispered, right in my ear. I spun around, swinging my flashlight. Nothing. I began to read the logs left by previous watchmen, hidden in the back of the binder. They were rambling, terrified scrawls. "The geometry is hostile. I saw myself on the stairs today. I looked older. The basement isn't the bottom." That last one stuck with me. The elevator went down to B3, but the plans in the security office showed a B4 through B10.
I had to know. The money didn't matter anymore. The building had its hooks in me. I found the service hatch in the floor of B3 inside a utility closet. It was welded shut, but the weld had rusted through. I pried it open with a crowbar. A blast of cold, rot-scented air hit me. A ladder descended into absolute darkness. I climbed down. B4 was flooded, knee-deep in stagnant water that reflected my light like black glass. Floating in the water were thousands of papers, personnel files. I fished one out. It was a photo of me, but in the photo, I was screaming, my eyes gouged out. The date on the file was 3 years in the future. I dropped it, backing away, the water churning around my legs. Something surfaced in the distance, a pale, bloated shape. It slipped back under without a splash. I scrambled up the ladder, sealing the hatch, but the building knew I had seen. The lights in the stairwell blew out, one by one, ascending toward me. I ran up the stairs, my flashlight beam jerking wildly, shadows elongated, grasping at my ankles. The walls began to pulse, contracting and expanding like the throat of a living thing. I could hear the concrete grinding, the rebar screaming. I made it to the lobby, but the front doors were gone. Where the glass entrance should have been, there was only a solid wall of concrete. I was sealed in. The monitors in the security booth all flickered on simultaneously. Every single screen showed my face, looking at the camera, smiling a smile that was too wide, filled with too many teeth. The speakers crackled. "Shift is not over, Elias. The archive must be maintained." I barricaded myself in the control room. I had a flare gun in the emergency kit. I realized the only way out was up. The roof. I had to get to the roof. I took the stairs, avoiding the elevators. I could hear them moving on their own, crashing up and down the shafts at impossible speeds. The climb was a blur of terror. On the 12th floor, gravity shifted. I was walking on the wall, the hallway stretching out vertically. On the 25th floor, the silt was pouring from the ceiling like a waterfall. I had to sprint through it, the substance burning my skin like acid. On the 33rd floor, I met Mr. Kellen. He was standing in the middle of the hallway, facing away from me. "Mr. Kellen!" I shouted. He turned around. He had no eyes, just hollow sockets filled with the black silt. "You looked at the mirrors, didn't you, Elias?" he gargled, his jaw unhinged, dropping to his chest. I fired the flare gun. The magnesium slug hit him in the chest, igniting him. He didn't scream. He just burned, illuminating the corridor in blinding red light. I ran past his burning effigy, the heat searing my face. I reached the 40th floor. The roof access door was chained. I could hear the building roaring now, a sound like tectonic plates grinding. The floor beneath me buckled. I smashed the lock with the crowbar, adrenaline giving me hysterical strength. The chain snapped. I kicked the door open and stumbled out into the night air. But it wasn't the night air. Above me wasn't the sky. It was a ceiling, a massive concrete ceiling, miles high, with giant industrial lights acting as stars. I wasn't in a building. I was inside something much, much larger. I ran to the edge of the roof and looked down. The city below was a model, a sprawling, infinite labyrinth of concrete mock-ups, and thousands of other monoliths just like this one, stretching out forever. I fell to my knees. The wind up here smelled of recycled air and ozone.
The door behind me slammed shut. The handle turned. I was trapped on the roof of a building, inside a world of concrete. I looked at the flashlight in my hand. It was flickering, and from the shadows of the roof's ventilation units, they began to emerge. The previous watchmen, pale, gaunt, their uniforms tattered, their eyes leaking the black silt. They didn't attack. They just gathered around me, a silent vigil. One of them stepped forward. It was the figure from the 14th floor. It handed me a clipboard. I looked at it. It was a new schedule. My name was at the top. Shift begins, the thing whispered. And as the artificial stars buzzed overhead, I realized the truth. I hadn't taken a job. I had been processed. I stood up, took the clipboard, and turned to face the endless concrete horizon. The terror faded, replaced by a cold, gray numbness. I was part of the architecture now.
They called us the Gemini twins, even though we weren't related, Elias and I. We were forged in the crucible of a cracked pavement playground in Detroit, bonded by the kind of childhood trauma that acts like superglue for the soul. I was the quiet one, the observer. Elias was the fire, the charm, the manic energy that could light up a room or burn it to the ground. We did everything together. First cigarettes, first stolen beers, first heartbreaks. But as we clawed our way into our late 20s, the dynamic shifted. I found Sarah, a job in architecture, a future that looked bright and orderly. Elias stayed in the gray. He drifted between jobs, his charm turning brittle, his eyes growing a little too hollow, a little too intense. I should have seen the cracks. I should have noticed how his grip on my shoulder lingered too long, how he'd joke about Sarah being an interloper with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But you don't question the ground you walk on, and Elias was my ground. So, when he suggested a weekend getaway to his grandfather's abandoned hunting lodge in the Upper Peninsula to celebrate my engagement, I agreed. It was to be our last hurrah as a duo, he said. A bachelor party for two. The drive up was 6 hours of heavy metal and nostalgia. Elias drove his battered Bronco, the engine roaring like a dying beast. As we crossed the Mackinac Bridge, the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. The further north we went, the denser the trees became, swallowing the road. By the time we hit the dirt track leading to Blackwood Ridge, civilization felt like a dream I'd woken up from. "No signal out here, Alex," Elias said, tossing his phone under the dashboard. "Just us and the ghosts." He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. The lodge was a monolith of rotting timber and black windows, perched on the edge of a ravine that dropped into infinite darkness. It looked like it had grown out of the earth rather than being built upon it. Dead ivy strangled the porch columns. "Rustic," I muttered, feeling a cold prickle of unease trace my spine. "Pure," Elias corrected. He killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. No birds, no wind, just the ticking of the cooling engine and the heavy, oppressive weight of the pines watching us. We unpacked in silence. The interior smelled of pine sap, old dust, and something metallic, like copper pennies left in the rain. There was no electricity, just oil lamps that Elias lit with practiced hands. The shadows they cast were long and dancing, distorting his face into something sharper, older. We drank whiskey by the fireplace, the flames licking at the soot-stained bricks. That first night, the nostalgia turned toxic. Elias didn't want to talk about the future. He only wanted to dissect the past. He retold stories of our youth, but they were wrong, twisted. In his version, I was always the victim, and he was always the savior. He spoke of my fiancée, Sarah, not as a person, but as a disease infecting me. "She's changing your chemical makeup, Alex," he slurred, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I can smell it on you. Domesticity, weakness. You're forgetting who we are." "I'm just growing up, Elle," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He slammed the glass down. It didn't break, but the sound was like a gunshot. "Growing up is a lie. It's just a slow death. We were supposed to be eternal." I went to bed early, locking my door, a flimsy hook and eye latch that felt ridiculous against the rising tide of dread in my gut. I slept fitfully, dreaming of wolves with Elias's eyes. I woke to the sound of scratching, rhythmic, wet scratching. It was coming from inside the wall behind my head. I sat up, breath pluming in the freezing air. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low, melodious humming. It was Elias. He was humming the lullaby his mother used to sing to us when we were hiding from his father. I opened the door. The hallway was a throat of darkness. Elias? No answer. I walked downstairs, the floorboards screaming under my weight. The front door was open wide, letting in the swirling snow. A storm had rolled in overnight. The Bronco was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. I ran out onto the porch. The tire tracks were already filling with snow. He had left me. Now, that didn't make sense. I checked my pockets. My phone was gone. My wallet was gone. I went back inside, shivering, and that's when I saw it. The table. It was set for dinner. 2 plates. But in the center, where a chancery should be, sat a jar. Inside, floating in formaldehyde, was a human finger. It wore a ring. My engagement ring. I vomited. Violent, dry heaves that tore at my throat. It wasn't possible. Sarah was back in Detroit. She was safe. This was a prank, a sick, twisted psycho prank. Do you like the appetizer? The voice came from the shadows of the kitchen. Elias stepped out. He was wearing a butcher's apron over his clothes, stained with fresh, bright red. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a remote control.
"Where is she?" I screamed, lunging at him. He sidestepped me with terrifying grace and clicked the remote. A static-filled image flickered onto a small battery-operated TV I hadn't noticed in the corner. It was a live feed, a dark room, a figure bound to a chair. Sarah. She was unconscious, her hand bandaged, blood seeping through the white gauze. "She's in the basement," Elias said softly. "Soundproof, very cozy." "I'll kill you," I whispered, the reality of the horror shattering my mind. "No, you won't, because we are the same, Alex. You can't kill me without killing yourself. Besides," he gestured to the TV, "I have the detonator. One wrong move, and the basement fills with carbon monoxide. She goes to sleep and never wakes up." He forced me to sit. He forced me to eat. Not the finger, God no, but a steak he had prepared. I chewed on ash and terror. He explained his philosophy. He believed we were a single soul split into 2 bodies. Sarah was a parasite trying to steal his half of the soul. He wasn't going to kill her, he claimed. He was going to excise her influence. But first, Elias smiled, and it was a rictus of madness. We need to realign our frequencies. The next 12 hours were a descent into hell. Elias had rigged the cabin with traps, tripwires, hidden cameras, speakers playing high-frequency whines. He made me play games, trivia about our friendship. If I got a question wrong, he would cut a piece of himself. Not me, himself. He sliced his palm when I forgot the date of our first concert. He burned his forearm when I couldn't recall the name of his first dog. "See," he wept, blood dripping onto the floorboards. "See how much I love you? I take the pain for us." It was psychological torture designed to break my empathy, to make me numb, but it only fueled a cold, hard rage. I needed to get to the basement. I needed a weapon. My chance came when the storm intensified, blowing out one of the boarded-up windows in the living room. The sudden crash distracted Elias. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace and swung. I missed his head, hitting his shoulder. The bone crunched. He howled, not in pain, but in betrayal. "You hurt me! You hurt us!" He tackled me. We rolled through the glass and snow on the floor. He was stronger, fueled by adrenaline and psychosis. He pinned me, his hands around my throat. I looked into his eyes and saw nothing human, just a black void where my best friend used to be. "I have to fix you," he whispered, tightening his grip. My hand scrabbled on the floor, finding a shard of glass from the broken window. I didn't think. I jammed it into the side of his neck. A fountain of hot blood sprayed over my face, blinding me. Elias gurgled, his grip loosening. He fell back, clutching his neck, his eyes wide with shock. I scrambled up, gasping for air, wiping the blood from my eyes. Elias was thrashing on the floor, making wet, bubbling sounds. I didn't wait for him to die. I ran to the kitchen, tearing through the cupboards until I found the keys to the basement on a hook shaped like a deer's head. The basement door was hidden behind a bookshelf. I unlocked it and descended into the cool, damp earth. The smell of bleach was overpowering. "Sarah!" I screamed. I found her in a small concrete room. She was groggy, drugged, but alive. Her finger, God, her hand was a mess of blood and bandages. I untied her, sobbing, apologizing. She couldn't walk. I had to carry her. We made it up the stairs. The living room was empty. A trail of blood led out the open front door into the snow. Elias was gone. We couldn't take the Bronco. He had the keys. We had to run, into the woods, in the blizzard. The cold was a physical weight. I carried Sarah on my back, tromping through knee-deep snow. Every shadow looked like him. Every sound was his footstep. We needed to reach the main road, 5 miles away. After an hour, my legs were burning. Sarah was drifting in and out of consciousness. I stopped to rest under the shelter of a massive oak. That's when I heard it. The humming. Hum, hum, hum. He was tracking us, bleeding out, dying, but hunting.
I forced us to move. We reached a frozen creek. The ice was thin. We had to cross. I went first, testing the weight. It held. I went back for Sarah. Halfway across, a flashlight beam cut through the snow. Elias stood on the bank we had just left. He looked like a revenant, pale, soaked in blood, holding a hunting rifle. "Alex!" he screamed, his voice a ruined croak. "Don't leave me!" He raised the rifle. I threw myself over Sarah as the shot rang out. The ice beneath us shattered. We plunged into the freezing black water. The shock was instantaneous. The current grabbed us. I held on to Sarah's jacket with a death grip. We were tumbled under the ice, scraping against rocks. My lungs burned. I kicked, fought, clawed upward. We broke the surface downstream, gasping, coughing up water. We dragged ourselves onto the muddy bank. We were freezing. Hypothermia was minutes away, but Elias wasn't behind us. The river had carried us away from him. We stumbled through the woods for what felt like an eternity. Finally, headlights. A trucker on the remote logging road. He saw us. 2 bloodied, freezing ghosts stumbling out of the tree line. Safe. We were safe. The police raided the lodge 3 hours later. They found the torture room. They found the jars. They detailed Elias's plan to surgically join us, to make us Siamese souls. But they didn't find Elias. They found a trail of blood leading to the edge of the ravine, and then nothing. They assumed he fell. They assumed the river took his body. Sarah survived. We got married a year later. She wears a prosthetic finger, a constant reminder. We moved to the city, got high security locks, a dog, a gun. We went to therapy. We tried to heal. But tonight, on our first anniversary, I woke up. The house was silent. Sarah was asleep beside me. I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. I looked in the mirror. I looked tired, older. Then I saw it, written in the condensation on the mirror, in handwriting I knew better than my own. Happy anniversary. And behind me, in the reflection, the shower curtain slowly began to pull back. Our first story tonight comes from Sarah, a 20-year-old college student who found solace and community in the vibrant world of online gaming. Sarah was an avid player of a popular fantasy MMORPG, spending countless hours exploring virtual worlds, battling mythical creatures, and forging alliances with players from across the globe. She particularly enjoyed the social aspect of the game, chatting with her guildmates, strategizing for raids, and sharing triumphs and defeats. For Sarah, it was an escape, a place where she could be herself without the pressures of real life. One evening, during a particularly intense raid, she found herself grouped with a player she hadn't encountered before. Their username was NightOwl_Visions. Night Owl was exceptionally skilled, a quiet but effective contributor to the team, and even offered Sarah some rare in-game items after a successful boss fight. Sarah, being polite, sent a quick thank you message, and Night Owl replied with a friendly, seemingly innocuous invitation to add them to her in-game friends list. Thinking nothing of it, as it was a common practice, she accepted. Initially, their interactions were entirely within the game. They'd team up for quests, exchange tips, and occasionally chat about the game's lore. Night Owl was always complimentary, praising Sarah's skills and her friendly demeanor. It was pleasant, if a little intense at times. Night Owl seemed to be online almost constantly, and their messages would pop up at odd hours, often immediately after Sarah logged on. Sarah just chalked it up to them being a hardcore gamer. Then things started to get weird. One day, Sarah mentioned casually in guild chat that she was swamped with an upcoming essay for her English literature class. A few hours later, she received an in-game message from Night Owl. "Good luck with your essay on Shakespeare. Don't forget to cite your sources properly. Professor Davies is strict about that." Sarah froze. She hadn't mentioned her major, her university, or even her professor's name anywhere in the game. A shiver ran down her spine. When she asked Night Owl how they knew, the reply was simply, "Oh, just a lucky guess. Happens to be my favorite author too." The casual tone did nothing to alleviate Sarah's growing unease. The incidents escalated. Sarah had a small, distinctive scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident. One day, Night Owl sent her a private message. "Did you know that scar above your left eye makes you look particularly fierce when you're concentrating?" Sarah's blood ran cold. She had never posted a picture of herself online, not even on her private social media accounts that were locked down tighter than Fort Knox. She'd explicitly avoided sharing her face on any gaming platforms. She immediately blocked Night Owl_visions in the game. She felt a surge of panic, a terrifying violation of her personal space. But blocking them didn't stop it. Within hours, she received a friend request from a new username, Midnight Watcher, with a message, "Why did you block me, Sarah? We were having so much fun." This new account also listed her exact university as its location. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. This wasn't a game anymore. She reached out to her guild leader, explaining the situation. To her horror, several other guild members reported receiving strange messages too. Night Owl, or whoever they were, had been asking about Sarah, trying to get information. One member even said Night Owl had messaged them asking about Sarah's favorite coffee shop, mentioning a specific one near her campus. Sarah frequented that coffee shop almost daily. The digital stalking began to manifest physically. Sarah started noticing little things. A car parked down her street that seemed to be there too often, a shadow lingering a little too long behind a bush when she walked her dog. She dismissed them as paranoia at first, but the feeling of being watched was constant, a suffocating weight on her shoulders. She became hypervigilant, constantly checking over her shoulder, jumping at every unexpected sound. One terrifying afternoon, she was walking home from class, engrossed in a podcast. Her phone vibrated. It was a message, not through the game, but an unknown number. The text read, "Nice new blue scarf, Sarah. It really suits you." Sarah looked down at the scarf she was wearing, a gift from her grandmother which she had put on that morning for the first time. She looked up, spinning around, her heart hammering against her ribs. There was no one immediately suspicious, just the usual stream of students and commuters, but the message had been sent mere seconds after she had stepped out of her last building. Someone was watching her, right then, right there. Sarah immediately went to the campus security and then to the police. They took her report, but tracing an anonymous number, especially one that could be a burner phone or routed through a VoIP service, was incredibly difficult. The online game accounts were similarly hard to pin down. The police advised her to limit her online presence, secure all her accounts, and be extremely careful. Sarah dropped out of her guild group, deleted all her social media profiles, changed her phone number, and even switched apartments after a few weeks, despite the financial strain. The constant fear of being watched, of knowing that some unknown person had meticulously pieced together details of her life from seemingly innocuous online interactions, was too much to bear. She never found out who Night Owl Visions or Midnight Watcher truly was, but the chilling experience left an indelible mark, forever changing her perception of online safety and the terrifying reality that the digital world can, and often does, bleed into the physical.
It's a truly harrowing thought, isn't it? How easily a seemingly innocent online connection can morph into something sinister. How readily our digital lives can be mined for personal information by those with ill intent. Sarah's story highlights just how vulnerable we can be, even when we think our privacy settings are ironclad. Every piece of information, no matter how small, can be a puzzle piece for a determined stalker.
Our next story comes from Liam, a talented freelance graphic designer who used social media as a crucial platform to showcase his portfolio and attract clients. Liam was in his late 20s, passionate about his work, and meticulously curated his online presence to highlight his artistic style and professional achievements. For him, social media was a gallery, a networking tool, and a window into his creative world. He had a modest but engaged following, and he genuinely enjoyed interacting with fellow artists and appreciative fans. One day, he noticed a new follower, an account named ArtLover99. This wasn't unusual, but ArtLover99 quickly stood out. Their comments on his posts were exceptionally enthusiastic, almost gushing, and they were always the first to like new content. Liam appreciated the dedication. It was flattering to have such an ardent admirer. ArtLover99 started sending him direct messages, initially praising specific pieces and asking technical questions about his process. Liam, always happy to engage with his fans, replied cordially. The DMs, however, soon became more personal. ArtLover99 started asking about his daily routine, his inspirations beyond art, and even his favorite coffee shop. Liam, still assuming it was just an overly enthusiastic fan, gave vague but polite answers. He mentioned he liked a specific indie coffee shop downtown, for instance, without thinking much of it. It wasn't exactly private information. Many people knew he went there. Then the subtle shifts began. ArtLover99 would comment on his Instagram stories, not just with generic praise, but with observations that were too specific. For example, Liam posted a story of his dog, Buster, curled up on his studio rug. ArtLover99 messaged, "Buster looks so cozy today, Liam. Did you give him that new chew toy from the pet store on Elm Street?" Liam stared at the message. He had indeed just bought Buster a new toy from that very specific pet store, but he hadn't mentioned it anywhere online. He felt a prickle of unease. One afternoon, while grabbing his usual latte at the indie coffee shop, Liam looked up and saw someone at a table by the window. They were wearing a dark hoodie, face obscured, but their phone was pointed vaguely in his direction. As he left, he glanced back, and the person quickly ducked their head. He brushed it off as coincidence, a lingering shadow of suspicion. But the incidents mounted. Anonymous gifts started arriving at his apartment building's mailroom. Small, quirky art supplies, a rare art book, even a box of his favorite artisanal coffee beans. There was never a return address, just a neatly printed label. Liam felt a growing sense of dread. Who was sending these, and how did they know his address? He had only given it out to a select few clients and close friends. The climax of this creeping digital obsession came one evening. Liam was working late in his studio, listening to a particular lo-fi jazz playlist he often put on when he needed to focus. His phone buzzed with an Instagram DM from ArtLover99. He opened it, bracing himself. The message read, "That lo-fi jazz really helps with concentration, doesn't it, Liam? Buster seems to be enjoying it too, asleep on the blue throw blanket." Liam's heart slammed against his ribs. Buster was indeed asleep, precisely on the blue throw blanket at his feet. The lo-fi jazz was playing softly. Liam was alone in his apartment on the second floor with curtains drawn. He slowly turned his head, scanning the room, every shadow suddenly a potential hiding place. He felt utterly exposed, violated in his own home. He snatched up Buster, pulled him close, and stumbled backwards, fumbling for his phone to call the police. The police arrived, took his report, but again, as with Sarah's story, the digital trail was murky. ArtLover99's account was active but untraceable, likely using VPNs and burner emails. The gifts, while unsettling, weren't overtly threatening enough for immediate action, and the police couldn't prove who had sent them. They advised Liam to enhance his security, both online and in his physical space. Liam was profoundly shaken. The next day, he packed an emergency bag and stayed with a friend for several nights. He ultimately decided to move apartments, changing his entire routine.
He deleted his old, meticulously curated social media accounts, starting fresh with new ones under a pseudonym and with stricter privacy settings. He installed security cameras and was far more wary of online interactions. He never found out who ArtLover99 was or how they had managed to get so close. The digital world, once a source of inspiration and connection, had become a landscape of lurking shadows. It's astonishing how easily admiration can twist into obsession, isn't it? Liam's story is a stark reminder that the digital crumbs we leave behind, the places we tag, the things we talk about, the patterns of our lives can be meticulously collected and weaponized by someone determined to cross the line. The seemingly benign aspects of our online lives can be exploited to construct a terrifyingly accurate picture of our real-world existence, shattering our sense of security.
Now, let's move to Chloe's experience. A story about an ex-boyfriend who refused to let go, using the digital realm as his weapon. Chloe, a vibrant and independent woman in her early 30s, had recently ended a tumultuous 6-month relationship with Mark. It had been messy, filled with arguments and emotional manipulation, and Chloe was relieved to finally be free. She blocked Mark on all her social media, her phone and email, determined to cut off all contact and move on. For a few weeks, there was silence. Chloe breathed a sigh of relief, thinking she had successfully navigated the difficult post-breakup phase. But Mark wasn't truly gone. He was simply adapting his tactics. The digital stalking began subtly. Chloe noticed old photos of herself, posted years before she even met Mark, suddenly being liked by anonymous accounts. Then friends of hers would mention strange messages from new profiles asking about Chloe, trying to gauge her mood or what she was doing. They were always vague, always just checking in on her, but the pattern was undeniable. It was Mark, or someone acting on his behalf. Her Instagram stories, usually a casual peek into her day, became a source of anxiety. Mark began creating fake accounts, sometimes even using photos of real people he vaguely knew to view her stories. He'd leave comments on friends' public posts where she was tagged, making passive-aggressive remarks about their past relationship or painting her in a negative light. Chloe tried to report these accounts, but they'd pop up faster than Instagram could take them down. Then things escalated to a terrifying degree. Mark started contacting Chloe's employer. He sent anonymous emails filled with fabricated stories and exaggerated claims about her professionalism and work ethic, clearly attempting to sabotage her career. Chloe's boss, fortunately, knew her well and dismissed the emails as malicious, but the incident left Chloe feeling violated and vulnerable at her workplace, a place she had always considered safe. The psychological toll was immense. Chloe felt constantly watched, even when she was alone. Every notification, every unknown number sent a jolt of fear through her. She changed her passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, and locked down her privacy settings even further, but Mark always seemed one step ahead. One evening, she received an email from an unfamiliar address. It contained a photo. The photo was Chloe, sitting alone in a park reading a book, taken just a few hours earlier. Her heart pounded at her chest. She hadn't seen anyone taking her picture, hadn't noticed Mark or anyone else nearby. The email's subject line read, "Miss me?" The most terrifying discovery came unexpectedly. Her car had been making a strange noise, so she took it to her mechanic. A day later, the mechanic called her, sounding grave. He had found a small, sophisticated GPS tracking device covertly attached to the underside of her car's chassis. It had been there for weeks, meticulously hidden. The realization hit Chloe like a physical blow. Mark wasn't just watching her online, he was tracking her every move in the real world. Every time she had gone out, every place she had visited, he knew. The anonymous photo, the timing of his online messages, it all made horrifying sense. He had been a silent, unseen passenger in her life, a constant predatory presence. Armed with this irrefutable proof, Chloe went to the police. This time, with the physical evidence of the GPS tracker and a clear pattern of digital harassment, they were able to act. A restraining order was issued against Mark, and he was warned that any further contact, digital or physical, would result in immediate arrest.
The legal action provided some relief, but the emotional scars ran deep. Chloe underwent extensive therapy to cope with the trauma. She spent months meticulously scrubbing her digital footprint, deleting old accounts, and being extremely guarded about any new online activity. She changed her routines, moved apartments, and invested in personal security. Mark eventually faded from her life, but the memory of his relentless digital pursuit and the chilling discovery of the GPS tracker served as a permanent reminder of how easily the lines between online and offline can blur, and how destructive a determined digital stalker can be. The experience taught her that true freedom from a toxic relationship sometimes means rebuilding your entire life from the ground up, both online and off. Chloe's story really underscores the weaponization of digital tools in personal disputes, especially after a breakup. The emotional and psychological toll of such relentless digital harassment is immense, stripping away a person's sense of safety and privacy even in their own home. It shows how quickly technology can be twisted from a tool of connection into an instrument of control and fear.
Our fourth chilling story comes from David, a passionate but often outspoken participant in niche online forums. David, a software engineer in his mid-30s, frequented a particular forum dedicated to vintage computing. He loved the community, the deep discussions, and the shared enthusiasm for obscure hardware and software. He was known on the forum for his strong opinions and his willingness to engage in lively debates, sometimes to a fault. One day, he found himself in a particularly heated argument with an anonymous user whose handle was Shadow Walker. The debate started intellectually about the merits of different operating systems, but Shadow Walker quickly became personal, making veiled insults about David's intelligence and even his character. David, frustrated, responded in kind, perhaps a little too sharply. The forum moderator eventually stepped in, but the exchange left a sour taste. David thought nothing more of it, dismissing Shadow Walker as just another internet troll. But Shadow Walker wasn't done. The threats started subtly within the forum's private messaging system. Messages like, "You might be a big shot on this forum, David, but let's see how you fare in the real world." David reported the messages, but the forum administrators said they couldn't do much without more specific threats, and tracing anonymous users was beyond their capabilities. Then, the threats started to become disturbingly specific. A message from Shadow Walker appeared in David's forum inbox. "I hear your company, Tech Solutions Pro, is working on an interesting new project. Hope you don't let your online antics affect your work, David." David felt a jolt of fear. He had mentioned his company's name in a general way in an old public LinkedIn profile, but his full name and specific project details were private. How did Shadow Walker connect the dots? He started feeling a pervasive sense of unease. He deleted his LinkedIn profile, tightened all his privacy settings, and stopped posting on the forum entirely. But it was too late. One morning, he woke up to find his car tire slashed. There was a crude, handwritten note tucked under his windshield wiper. It read, "Careful where you park, David. Some people don't appreciate your opinions." His stomach dropped. This wasn't just online anymore. This was real. The incidents escalated. He started receiving cryptic, anonymous emails to his personal address, an email he had never linked to his forum account or any public profile. The emails contained snippets of their old forum debate, sometimes with highlighted sections, and always ended with a chilling, non-specific threat. "You won't be so smart when you're looking over your shoulder. Enjoy your morning jog, David. The fresh air is good for the soul." David's morning jog was a private routine he had never shared with anyone, not even close friends. He went to the police, presenting the emails and the forum messages. They advised him to be cautious, but without a clear suspect or more concrete evidence, their hands were tied. The digital breadcrumbs were too scattered, too anonymous. The climax of David's nightmare came one terrifying evening. He returned home from work to find his front door wide open. His heart leapt into his throat.
He cautiously entered, finding nothing stolen, nothing overtly disturbed, but on his kitchen counter, precisely positioned in the center, was a printed screenshot of his forum profile, complete with his username and avatar. Scrawled across it, in the same crude handwriting as the note on his car, was his full home address, circled in red. Below it, one chilling word: found. David didn't wait. He immediately called the police, who arrived promptly. They found no signs of forced entry, suggesting whoever had entered his home might have had a key or picked the lock with ease. The realization that Shadow Walker had not only found his address, but had also been inside his home, leaving a message of pure terror, was paralyzing. David was advised to change his locks immediately, and the police increased patrols in his neighborhood. David was utterly traumatized. He put his house up for sale, moved across the state, and completely disappeared from all online forums and social media. He even switched jobs, taking a position that allowed him to work remotely and minimized his public profile. He never learned Shadow Walker's true identity, but the experience shattered his sense of security and trust in the digital world. He realized how much of his life he had inadvertently shared online over the years, and how a determined and malicious individual could piece it all together to create a weaponized dossier against him. David now lives a meticulously private life, constantly aware of his digital footprint, forever haunted by the silent, unseen threat that had invaded his home and his peace of mind. It's chilling to think about how much of our lives we inadvertently share online, isn't it? David's story reminds us that even in seemingly anonymous corners of the internet, a heated argument can transform into a real-world terror, and that the shield of anonymity for one person can become a weapon against another. The concept of personal space has truly been redefined in the digital age, and not always for the better.
Finally, we have Emily's story, a stark reminder that sometimes the most insidious threats come disguised as friendly faces. Emily, a bright and outgoing college freshman, was eager to make new friends and immerse herself in campus life. She was active on social media, sharing glimpses of her classes, her newfound independence, and the general excitement of starting a new chapter. Like many students, her privacy settings were somewhat relaxed, assuming her network was largely composed of friends and acquaintances. One day, she received a friend request on Facebook from a profile named Jessica Miller. Jessica's profile picture was of an attractive young woman, and she had several mutual friends with Emily, mostly people from Emily's hometown. Jessica sent a message: "Hey Emily, I'm pretty sure we have a mutual friend, Sarah T. She told me we should connect. I'm starting at Emily's university next semester. Would love to hear about your experience there." Emily, always open to making new connections and helping out future students, accepted the request and messaged Jessica back. Their online chats were friendly and frequent. Jessica asked a lot of questions about Emily's classes, her favorite professors, her dorm life, her weekend activities, and her part-time job at the campus bookstore. Emily, seeing Jessica as a friendly future classmate, openly shared details, often sending photos of her campus, her study spot in the library, or even a funny selfie from her dorm room. Jessica was always responsive, always eager to hear more, and always seemed to know just the right thing to say. Then the subtle red flags started appearing. One morning, Emily posted a picture of her new haircut on her Instagram story. Within minutes, Jessica messaged her on Facebook. "Love the new haircut, Emily. The layers really suit you. Did you get it done at the salon near the student union?" Emily blinked. She had indeed just gotten her haircut there, but she hadn't tagged the salon or mentioned its location. She brushed it off as a lucky guess. Perhaps Jessica knew the area well. The unsettling incidents escalated. Emily was wearing a specific, somewhat unique vintage band t-shirt to class one day. Later that afternoon, she received a message from Jessica. "Cool t-shirt today, Emily. Never thought you'd be into blank band." Emily felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She hadn't posted anything about her outfit. How could Jessica have known? The climax of this digital invasion came when Jessica sent Emily a photo. It was a clear, zoomed-in picture of Emily, walking alone across the main campus quad, engrossed in her phone, taken from behind a tree. Emily was wearing the exact same clothes she had been wearing just an hour ago. The photo was taken from a distance, but undeniably of her. Jessica's accompanying message read, "Caught you off guard, didn't I? Guess I'm closer than you think." Emily's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a future classmate anymore. This was a stalker, someone who had been watching her, tracking her movements, and meticulously collecting details about her life, all while masquerading as a friendly peer. She immediately blocked Jessica, reported the account to Facebook, and deleted all her posts, feeling a profound sense of terror and violation. She went straight to campus security and the police. They were gravely concerned. They tried to trace Jessica's account, but it vanished almost immediately after Emily reported it. There were no digital fingerprints, no traceable IP addresses, no real-world connections. The profile picture was a stock photo, and the mutual friends were either fake accounts themselves or real people who had been unknowingly friended by the imposter. Days turned into weeks, and Emily lived in a constant state of paranoia. She changed her dorm room, varied her routes to class, and became extremely guarded, even with her closest friends. The feeling of being watched never truly left her. She would see someone in a hoodie from afar, or a person lingering a little too long, and her heart would pound. One evening, she returned to her new dorm room to find a small, neatly folded piece of paper tucked under her door. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Written in neat, elegant script were just a few words. "You're always closer than you think, Emily. Just like we talked about, right?" Below the text was a small, hand-drawn sketch of the unique vintage band t-shirt she had worn on that terrifying day. The note was unsigned, but Emily knew exactly who it was from. The use of "just like we talked about" was a direct reference to their online chats, an insidious reminder of how she had unknowingly provided her stalker with the very ammunition they used to terrorize her. The police and campus security investigated again, but without surveillance footage or witnesses, there was little they could do. Emily continued her studies, but her college experience was forever tainted by the constant fear. She never learned who Jessica Miller truly was or why she had targeted her. The experience left her with a deep-seated distrust of online interactions and a permanent sense of vulnerability, a chilling reminder that in the digital age, a friendly face online can easily hide a much darker, more sinister intent. These stories, as terrifying as they are not just meant to scare you. They are stark reminders of the very real dangers that lurk in the online world and how easily our digital lives can become intertwined with real-world threats. From gaming communities to social media, from ex-partners to anonymous forum users, the digital landscape offers countless avenues for those with malicious intent to invade our privacy and instill fear. It's crucial to be vigilant, to think twice before sharing personal details, and to secure your accounts with strong, unique passwords and two-factor authentication. Remember that every piece of information you put online, no matter how small, can be a potential puzzle piece for someone determined to piece together your life. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. And never hesitate to report suspicious activity to the proper authorities, even if it feels like just a hunch.
Our first story comes from Elias, a man who, for most of his life, found profound peace in the embrace of ancient forests. He was a seasoned solo hiker, a true woodsman who knew the rhythm of the trees and the whispers of the wind. His preferred sanctuary was Blackwood Forest, a sprawling expanse of ancient oaks and towering pines, notorious for its age and density. It was late October, the air crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a smell Elias cherished. The forest floor was a tapestry of amber and russet, crunching satisfyingly under his boots as he ventured deeper, leaving the last vestiges of the hiking trail far behind. That day, however, was different. The usual symphony of the forest, the chirping of birds, the rustle of small creatures, the distant caw of a crow, was eerily absent. A silence, unnatural and heavy, pressed in on him. It wasn't the peaceful quiet he sought. It was a watchful, expectant stillness that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Every fiber of his being screamed that something was amiss. He felt it in the prickle on his neck, the subtle shift in the air, the unmistakable sensation of being observed, even though he could see nothing but endless trees. He tried to shake off the unease, attributing it to an overactive imagination or perhaps the solitude amplifying his senses. But then it began. Faint, indistinguishable voices. They weren't from the wind. These were too distinct, too numerous. They sounded like human voices, but distorted, just beyond the grasp of comprehension, like a conversation happening in a language he almost knew, just out of reach. What truly unnerved him was that they seemed to move with him, always just behind him, always just to his sides. He would pause, straining his ears, and they would quiet, only to resume the moment he took another step. He spun around several times, scanning the dense undergrowth, but saw nothing but the unchanging pattern of trees and shadows. His heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The quiet was now a void, amplifying the phantom sounds. He swore he saw shadows shifting in his peripheral vision, movements that vanished the instant he tried to focus on them. It was as if the forest itself was playing a cruel trick on his mind, a psychological torment designed to unravel him. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, no longer faint murmurs but a cacophony of hushed, almost angry tones converging on him. They sounded frustrated, perhaps even malevolent. He started checking behind him constantly, his grip tightening on his hiking poles, every muscle tensed. Then, through a break in the canopy, between two ancient gnarled oaks whose branches seemed to weep with age, he saw it, a tall, dark figure. It stood unnaturally still, too rigid for a human, too statuesque for an animal. It was too far to make out any definitive details, but its presence alone radiated an oppressive chill. Its form seemed to absorb the light around it, making it appear as a void against the backdrop of the autumnal woods. It didn't move, didn't twitch. It simply stood, watching him. The absolute stillness of it was more terrifying than any sudden movement could have been. Elias felt an ancient, malevolent intelligence fixated solely on him. Panic, raw and visceral, seized him. All thought of rational explanation evaporated. His only instinct was to flee. He ran, scrambling through the undergrowth, ignoring the branches that lashed at his face and clothes. The whispers, now a furious chorus, seemed to chase him, echoing the frantic beat of his own feet. He didn't dare look back, but he could feel the figure's unblinking gaze burning into his back, a sensation that drove him harder, pushing his exhausted body to its limits. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs ached with fiery protest, until he burst out of the tree line and onto the gravel access road, collapsing in a gasping heap. He eventually dragged himself to his car, fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking so violently he could barely insert them into the ignition. He started the engine, threw the car into reverse, and sped away, not daring to glance in his rearview mirror until the forest was a distant, dark smudge against the horizon. Years later, Elias still avoids deep forests. The solitude he once cherished is now a source of dread. He still hears whispers in the wind, in the quiet of his own home, faint echoes of that terrifying encounter. He questions what he saw, what truly haunted him that day, but the terror was too real, too profound to dismiss as mere imagination. The woods for Elias are no longer a sanctuary, but a lurking nightmare. Our second story comes from Sarah, an artist who sought inspiration in the secluded beauty of nature. She chose Whisper Wind Lake, a remote, mirror-smooth body of water nestled deep within an untouched wilderness, known for its pristine beauty and its sudden, thick fogs. It was mid-August, the air warm and humid, and Sarah had set up her campsite by the shore, eager to capture the lake's serene essence on canvas. She spent her days sketching, her nights listening to the gentle lapping of water against the shore, a perfect escape from the city's chaos. One afternoon, without warning, a dense pea soup fog rolled in, swallowing the landscape whole. It was so thick it reduced visibility to mere feet, an impenetrable shroud that disoriented her instantly. She had ventured a short distance from her campsite to collect some wildflowers for her sketches, and now the path she thought she knew intimately had vanished. Panic began to set in as the sun dipped lower and the light grew dim, turning the fog into an even more oppressive presence. Stumbling blindly through the swirling mist, desperately trying to retrace her steps, she unexpectedly stumbled upon something solid. It was an old, dilapidated cabin, one she had never seen on any map of the area. It looked ancient, forgotten, its timbers gray with age and coated in moss. Windows were boarded up, but on one side, through a gap in the rotting wood, she saw a faint, flickering light. A morbid curiosity, stronger than her fear, drew her closer. As she approached, the flickering light seemed to pulse with a slow, rhythmic beat. She heard faint sounds emanating from within, a discordant tinkling music, like an old music box playing a broken tune but warped, out of sync. It was unsettling, almost mournful. Then she heard scratching sounds, soft at first, then growing more insistent, like long nails dragging across a rough surface. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she couldn't tear herself away. She felt a strange pull, a morbid fascination that defied all logic. Driven by an inexplicable urge, she pressed her eye to the narrow gap in the window boards. What she saw sent a shockwave of ice through her veins. An old, withered face, impossibly pale, with eyes that seemed ancient and empty, devoid of any light, stared back at her from the gloom inside. It was there for only a fraction of a second, a fleeting glimpse of something that defied human understanding, before it vanished as quickly as it appeared. The music box tunes seemed to swell slightly, then became silent, replaced by an unnerving quiet. Just as Sarah's mind struggled to process what she had seen, a low, drawn-out creak echoed through the dense fog. The cabin's front door, which had appeared firmly sealed and weathered, slowly began to swing open, revealing a deeper, more profound darkness within. From that void, a shadowy form, vaguely humanoid but indistinct, seemed to expand, its edges blurring into the surrounding mist. It was as if the darkness itself was taking on a physical shape, slowly emerging into the fading light. Sarah screamed, a raw, terrified sound that was quickly swallowed by the fog. She didn't hesitate, didn't think, she simply turned and ran, blindly plunging back into the swirling whiteout. She didn't care about direction, only about putting as much distance as possible between herself and that horrifying cabin. The fog, which had once felt merely disorienting, now seemed to press in on her, clutching at her, its icy tendrils making it impossible to see. Through the pounding in her ears, she thought she heard a faint, distorted laugh following her, a sound that twisted her stomach into knots. Eventually, by some miracle of instinct or sheer luck, she stumbled upon the main road far from where she intended to be. She managed to hitchhike to the nearest town, abandoning her campsite and all her belongings. Sarah never went camping again. She's haunted by the withered face in the window and the chilling thought of what might have fully emerged from the cabin's abyss. Sometimes, in the quiet of her apartment, she still hears the faint, broken melody of that music box tune, a cruel reminder of the nightmare she barely escaped.
Our third terrifying tale comes from David, a solo mountaineer who lived for the challenge of conquering remote peaks. He was an experienced climber, an ascetic who thrived on the vast silence and unforgiving beauty of high altitude. His latest expedition took him to a particularly remote section of the Rockies, a range known for its stark, breathtaking, and often deadly landscapes. It was an early morning ascent, the air thin and biting, swirling with fresh snow, and David felt the familiar thrill of pushing his limits in splendid isolation. As he navigated a treacherous ice-covered ridge, the wind howling around him, he clearly heard it, his name. David, it called, carried on the wind, crisp and clear. He paused, surprised. He was miles from any other human, and the idea of an echo seemed improbable given the direction. He dismissed it as a trick of the wind, a momentary auditory hallucination brought on by fatigue and the biting cold. Yet a sliver of unease had been planted. He called out, "Hello." His voice, normally strong and resonant, was immediately answered by an echo. But it wasn't a normal echo. It was distorted, guttural, as if his own words were being mimicked by something with a broken, monstrous throat. It sounded less like a reflection of sound and more like a cruel mockery. This happened several times. Each time he spoke, the distorted echo would reply, each time a little closer, a little more menacing. He began to feel a profound sense of dread, the silence between the echoes suddenly pregnant with menace. Through the swirling snow and the jagged rock formations, he started seeing fleeting shapes. Dark, hunched figures that would appear at the very edge of his vision, only to vanish the instant he tried to focus on them. They were gone before he could properly register them, yet their presence was undeniable, leaving a chill in his heart. It felt like something was playing a psychological game with him, testing his sanity, pushing him to the brink of what he could comprehend. He knew he was truly alone, yet he felt utterly surrounded. The echo became more direct, the sounds less like repetitions and more like a conversation, or rather an attempt at communication. Muffled, indecipherable words would follow his own, growing louder, more coherent. Then, chillingly, he heard a clear phrase, "You're not alone." It was whispered, yet it sliced through the wind's roar, speaking directly into his mind. He froze, every muscle rigid with terror. What was out here? What was toying with him? He reached a particularly narrow ledge, a notorious traverse with a sheer, unforgiving drop hundreds of feet below. As he carefully navigated the icy path, placing one boot precisely in front of the other, he felt it, a distinct cold push on his back. It wasn't strong enough to send him hurtling into the abyss, but it was undeniable, physical contact. He stumbled, his heart leaping into his throat, nearly losing his balance, but managed to catch himself just in time, his gloved hand scraping against the rock face. He spun around, adrenaline surging, but there was no one there, nothing but the swirling snow and the vast, empty expanse of the mountain. The realization that something unseen had tried to kill him froze him to the bone. David abandoned the climb immediately. All thoughts of glory or achievement vanished, replaced by an overwhelming urge to escape. He descended rapidly, not caring for caution, driven by an almost primal fear. He kept looking over his shoulder, convinced that whatever had pushed him was still there, lurking in the snow and shadow. The wind, which had once seemed to mock him, now seemed to whisper his name, an endless, insidious sound, until he was well below the tree line, where the ancient pines offered a small but welcome reprieve from the crushing isolation of the high peaks. He never returned to mountaineering. The vast, silent beauty of the mountains, once his solace, now held a sinister presence, a memory of an unseen entity that sought his demise. He distrusts his own senses, always wondering if the mountain truly spoke, if something ancient and malevolent dwelt within its icy heart, or if he had encountered something far more personal and terrifying. The cold dread of that push, the feeling of a presence intent on his death, still haunts his dreams, a recurring nightmare of an unseen hand pushing him toward the void.
Our fourth chilling story concerns Mark, a lifelong fisherman who knew the local rivers intimately. He had spent countless hours on the Willow Creek River, a winding waterway known for its deep pools and abundant fish. For Mark, fishing was more than a hobby. It was a communion with nature, a quiet meditation. He knew every bend, every ripple, every secret of the river. One late summer evening, as dusk began to settle, casting long shadows across the water, he found himself at a particularly secluded bend, a spot he considered his personal sanctuary. The river, usually a lively chatter of rushing water and rustling leaves, was unnaturally still that evening. The surface of the deepest pool where he cast his line was like glass, reflecting the deepening twilight with eerie precision. An odd, sweet scent, not from any known plant or flower, began to permeate the air, intoxicating and slightly dizzying. A prickle of unease started to crawl up his spine, but he dismissed it as the strange calm before a summer night. Then, he saw it. Beneath the surface of the deepest pool, a pulsating, ethereal blue light. It wasn't a reflection of the sky or any natural phenomenon. It was clearly emanating from within the water itself. It moved slowly with a strange, deliberate intelligence, almost as if searching for something. Mark's rational mind struggled to find an explanation, his eyes widening in disbelief as the light continued its hypnotic dance beneath the water. As he watched, captivated, a beautiful, haunting melody began. It was a woman's voice, wordless, but full of an ancient sorrow and an irresistible allure. It seemed to come from the water itself, a siren song that resonated deep within his soul. Mark felt an overwhelming, undeniable compulsion to approach the water, to wade in, to surrender himself to the source of that enchanting sound. He felt his feet moving forward almost without conscious command, a puppet to the ethereal music. His fishing rod clattered, forgotten, to the ground as he stepped closer to the river's edge. He was at the very brink now, the cold water lapping at his boots. The blue light beneath the surface brightened, revealing a vague, graceful form moving within the depths, barely visible through the shimmering water. It was long, slender, and seemed to possess an unearthly beauty, shrouded in the shifting light. The singing intensified, filling his mind, drowning out all other thoughts, all sense of self-preservation. He felt an overwhelming, undeniable compulsion to embrace the cold embrace of the river, to join whatever entity beckoned from below. He leaned forward, his mind hazy with enchantment, ready to step into the darkness. Just as he was about to surrender, to take that final, fateful step into the unknown, a pale, unnaturally long and slender hand, with fingers that seemed vaguely webbed and tipped with dark nails, rose from the water. It reached slowly, deliberately towards his arm, its skin looking cold, translucent, and disturbingly human. The sight of that hand, so starkly alien and horrifying, shattered the enchantment. A gasp tore from his throat, and he stumbled backward, breaking free from the trance, shaking violently as if woken from a terrible nightmare. The singing abruptly stopped, the blue light vanished, and the river returned to its normal, gentle flow, as if nothing had happened. Mark threw away his fishing gear that night. He never returned to that bend in the river, nor any large body of water, especially at dusk. The melody of the siren song sometimes echoes in his mind, and he feels a cold, empty ache, as if a part of him still yearns for the river, for the mysterious entity that called to him. He knows, with a chilling certainty, that he encountered something ancient, something that feeds on souls, and that he narrowly escaped being dragged into an aquatic abyss, forever bound to the river's silent depths. Our final harrowing story comes from Frank, a grizzled veteran hunter, an expert tracker who prided himself on his self-sufficiency and his intimate knowledge of the wild. For decades, he had roamed the vast, untamed wilderness of northern Maine, a region known for its challenging terrain and its untouched beauty. Early one morning, with a heavy mist clinging to the ancient trees, Frank set out, rifle in hand, seeking game. He felt the familiar thrill of the hunt, the primal connection to the land. But that day, the wilderness had other plans. He soon discovered a set of tracks that were neither animal nor human. They were bipedal, yes, but impossibly large, far too wide, with an odd splayed toe pattern that defied anything he had ever seen in all his years of tracking. What truly unnerved him was their irregularity. They seemed to vanish and reappear, as if the creature could simply step out of existence and back in. A cold dread began to seep into his bones. Then came the smell, an overpowering, fetid odor, like rotting meat mixed with sulfur and something indescribably foul. It was an alien stench, primal and sickening, unlike anything he had ever encountered in the woods. It clung to the air, growing stronger as he cautiously followed the strange tracks. He felt a profound shift, the unsettling realization that he was no longer the hunter. He was unmistakably the hunted. Eyes, unseen, seemed to bore into his back, constant and predatory. The mist itself seemed to swirl with an unnatural intent, distorting shapes, playing tricks on his vision.
He started hearing rustling sounds, too loud for a squirrel, too soft for a deer, always just out of sight, always moving parallel to him. He stopped, raising his rifle, scanning the dense foliage, but saw nothing. The silence would return, thick and heavy, only to be broken by a deep, guttural sound, unlike any animal he knew. It was a growl that echoed through the mist, a sound of raw aggression, territorial and menacing, promising violence to any who encroached upon its domain. Through a brief, tantalizing break in the mist, he saw it. A towering, hunched figure, covered in dark, matted fur or hair, moving with unnatural speed, almost blurring between the trees. Its head seemed disproportionately small for its massive body, and its limbs impossibly long, ending in what looked like powerful, clawed hands. It was gone in an instant, a fleeting nightmare that burned itself into his memory. He stood frozen, his heart pounding a frantic drum against his ribs, unable to reconcile what he had just witnessed with anything he knew of the natural world. Frank retreated to his camp, his mind reeling, every instinct screaming at him to get out. He frantically barricaded himself inside his tent, rifle loaded and ready, but he knew it was futile. He heard heavy, deliberate footsteps circling his tent, crushing leaves and twigs. A tearing sound ripped through the silence as something tried to rip open the side of his tent. A growl, ferocious and deep, rupting right outside, so close he could feel the vibrations. He knew it was its prey, and it was toying with him. In a desperate act of self-preservation, Frank fired a warning shot into the air, hoping to scare it off. The growl paused, then resumed with even greater fury. Realizing he was outmatched, he unzipped his tent and bolted, running blindly into the mist, leaving his camp and all his gear behind. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs gave out, until he collapsed from exhaustion, the terrifying growls still echoing in his mind, a promise of what awaited him if he dared to stop. He eventually stumbled upon a logging road and by sheer luck was picked up by a passing truck. Frank never hunted again. He lives in a small, isolated cabin now, always armed, always looking over his shoulder. The wilderness, once his sanctuary, became his personal hell, a place of unimaginable terror. He knows with absolute certainty that what he encountered was real, a monstrous entity that defies description, and he lives with the chilling conviction that it's still out there, deep in the untouched forests of Maine, waiting for another unfortunate soul to wander too deep into its dark primordial domain.
I am not a ghost hunter. I don't believe in spirits, demons, or the lingering souls of the Victorian dead. I am an urban explorer, an urbexer. I document decay. I photograph the entropy of human ambition. I've breathed in the asbestos of Detroit factories, waded through the flooded basements of abandoned asylums in Belgium, and slept in the radioactive silence of the zone. I thought I had seen the worst that neglect could do to a structure. I thought I knew the smell of history rotting, but I was wrong. What I found in the Ural Mountains, at a set of coordinates that shouldn't have existed, wasn't just abandoned, it was severed. And the story I'm about to tell you, this true story that I am typing with trembling fingers while sitting in a sterile hotel room 3,000 miles away, is a warning. Some doors are locked for a reason. Some places aren't meant to be found. It began on a forum deep within the onion-routed layers of the dark web. Not the flashy red rooms or drug markets, but the boring gray text boards where structural engineers and obsessed historians trade blueprints of Cold War bunkers. A user named Crot55 had posted a thread simply titled Object 808, the Silent Hive. The coordinates pointed to a dense, unmarked patch of forest about 200 kilometers north of Yekaterinburg. There were no roads on Google Earth, just a blurred canopy of pines. Crot55 claimed it was a biological computing facility abandoned in 1992, immediately after the fall of the Union. But the hook wasn't the history, it was the claim that the facility had been sealed from the outside with concrete reinforced with lead, and that the power grid was still pulling a low low-voltage hum from the earth. I spent 3 months planning the expedition. I hired a local guide, a man named Vadim, who smelled of cheap tobacco and diesel, to drive me as far as the logging roads would allow. From there, it was a 2-day hike. The forest in that part of Russia feels ancient. The trees are too tall, the silence too heavy. It presses against your eardrums. As I hiked, carrying 40 pounds of camera gear, a Geiger counter, and survival supplies, I felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere. The birds stopped singing about 5 miles out from the coordinates. It wasn't a gradual fade, it was a sudden cut, as if someone had pulled the plug on the ambient noise of nature. I found the perimeter fence on the afternoon of the second day. It was 12 feet high, topped with rusted razor wire that looked like thorny vines. But the wire faced inward. That was the first red flag. Usually, fences keep people out. This one was designed to keep something in. I found a breach where a fallen pine had crushed a section of the chain link. I slipped through, checking my Geiger counter. Background levels were normal. No radiation, just the silence and the smell of wet iron. The facility itself was a brutalist monolith of gray concrete, half buried in the side of a granite ridge. It looked like a tombstone for a giant. The main entrance was indeed sealed, a massive pour of concrete blocking the blast doors. But urbexers know that no seal is perfect. I found a ventilation shaft on the roof, the grates rusted through. I secured my rope, clicked on my headlamp, and descended into the throat of the beast. The air inside was stale, dry, and surprisingly warm. It smelled of ozone and copper, like a handful of old pennies. I dropped into what looked like a maintenance corridor. My boots crunched on dead insects. Thousands of them. A carpet of desiccated beetles and moths covered the floor, all clustered around the vents as if they had been trying to escape. I began my documentation. I moved from room to room, snapping long exposure shots. The upper levels were standard Soviet administration. Desks with rotary phones, portraits of Lenin rotting in frames, papers scattered everywhere. But the preservation was uncanny. There was no water damage, no mold. The papers weren't yellowed. They were crisp. It was as if time had stopped the moment the airlock was sealed. I found a calendar on the wall of a secretary's office. October 1992. The dates were crossed off with a red marker until the 14th. Then, nothing. I moved deeper. Level 2 was the cafeteria and the dormitories. This is where the dread began to set in. In the cafeteria, trays were still on the tables. Bowls of what used to be borscht had turned into black, hard pucks. But there were no chairs pushed back. No signs of panic. It looked like the people had simply vanished mid-meal. I entered the dormitory block. Rows of metal bunks. In the first room, I saw clothes laid out on the bed. A uniform, trousers, shirt, socks. I reached out to touch the fabric, and it crumbled to dust under my finger. But it wasn't just clothes. Inside the clothes, where a body should have been, there was a residue, a fine, gray powder. I shone my light on the pillow, a dark stain shaped vaguely like a head, soaked into the fabric. My heart hammered against my ribs. I checked the Geiger counter again. Click, click. Nothing dangerous, but my instincts were screaming at me to leave. The air felt heavy, viscous, like I was walking through invisible gelatin. I should have turned back, but the obsession is a sickness. I wanted to know what Object 808 was. I wanted the money shot. I found the freight elevator shaft. The car was stuck on a lower floor, so I rappelled down the cables. Level 3, laboratories. Level 4, secure archives. Level 5, the hive. The atmosphere changed as I passed level 3. The walls weren't just concrete, they were lined with soundproofing foam that had degraded into a black, sticky tar. The copper smell was overpowering now, mixed with the sweet, cloying scent of formaldehyde. I entered a lab. Glass tanks lined the walls. Most were broken, the fluid evaporated. But inside the tanks were things. Not animals, not humans. They looked like biological hardware, a human nervous system woven into a circuit board, a brain floating in a jar pierced by hundreds of gold filaments. I found a logbook on a desk. It was written in Russian, technical shorthand. I speak enough to get by, and I snapped photos of the pages to translate later. One entry stood out, scribbled in frantic handwriting. The resonance is increasing.
The organic processors are not rejecting the signal, they are amplifying it. We hear the voices in the static. They are not coming from the transmitter, they are coming from the flesh. I moved to the stairwell to descend to level 5. The stairs were covered in a thick, carpet-like growth. At first, I thought it was fungus. I knelt to inspect it. It wasn't mold, it was hair, human hair, black, brown, blonde, gray. It grew out of the concrete like grass, weaving together into a mat. I recoiled, gagging. The copper smell was so strong I could taste blood in my mouth. I reached level 5. The sign on the heavy blast door read, "Central Processing, Restricted." The door was slightly ajar. A pale blue light pulsed from within. Not electric light, it was bioluminescence.
I squeezed through the gap. The room was a cavern, a massive circular control center. Banks of computers lined the walls, huge reel-to-reel tape machines and oscilloscopes. But the machines were wrong. The cables didn't just run along the floor. They pulsed, thick, fleshy veins wrapped around the metal consoles. The monitors were embedded in tissue that looked like raw steak, and in the center of the room, hanging from the ceiling by a web of cables and viscera, was the master node. It was a mass of fused bodies. I don't know how else to describe it. Dozens of torso-like shapes melted together. Their skins stretched translucent over machinery. Their spines were connected to thick data cables that ran up into the darkness of the ceiling, and they were breathing, a slow, collective heave. The blue light came from the monitors embedded in their chests, screens flashing streams of Cyrillic code that moved too fast to read. I was paralyzed. I couldn't lift my camera. I couldn't breathe. The sound of the room was a wet, rhythmic thumping, like a giant heart. Then, one of the heads in the mass moved. It was a woman's face, distorted, stretched wide, her eyes replaced by camera lenses. She, or it, swiveled on a neck of twisted cabling to look directly at me. A speaker somewhere in the room crackled to life. It wasn't a voice. It was a chorus of voices, layered over one another, speaking in perfect unison. Observer found. Integration required. The hair on the floor began to move. It wasn't just growing, it was writing. The strands lashed out, wrapping around my boots. I screamed. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the gear. I didn't care about the photos. I scrambled up the hair-choked stairs, slipping on the slick organic residue. Behind me, the facility woke up. The low-voltage hum turned into a shriek. The air pressure dropped, popping my ears. I could hear the wet slapping sound of things detaching themselves from the walls of the hive. I climbed the elevator cables with the strength of absolute terror. My hands bled on the wire. I could hear them below me, the skittering of bone and metal claws on concrete. I burst out of the ventilation shaft and into the cold night air. I didn't stop. I ran through the forest, tearing my clothes on branches, falling, getting up, running until my lungs burned like fire. I didn't stop until I reached the logging road, 10 miles away. I collapsed there, shivering in the dirt until Vadim found me the next morning. He didn't ask questions. He took one look at my eyes and drove me straight to the airport. I developed the photos. Most of them are corrupted, just gray noise. But one survived. The shot of the master node. I'm looking at it right now. And the terrifying thing isn't the gore. It isn't the impossible fusion of man and machine. It's that in the high-resolution scan, on the screen embedded in the woman's chest, I can see a file directory, and the last modified file has a timestamp. It's dated today, and the file name is my name. I can hear the humming in the walls of this hotel room. I can smell copper. They didn't just stay in the mountain. The network has coverage everywhere. If you find coordinates for Object 808, burn them. Don't go looking for the truth. Some things in abandoned places aren't waiting to be found. They are waiting to be fed.
I am writing this because I can feel my memory starting to dissolve, like wet tissue paper in a storm drain. I need to get this down, every detail, every smell, every terrifying second, before the static in my head gets too loud to think over.
If you found this on the Urban Exploration forums or buried in a paste bin link, just know that everything I'm about to describe is true. I wish to God it was fiction. I wish I was just a creative writer looking for clout, but I'm not. My name is Elias, and 3 days ago, I broke into the Auxier-DuPont Subterranean Data Archive in the remote wilderness of West Virginia. We call it the Hive. The rumors about the Hive had been circulating in the Urbex community for years, but usually they were dismissed as creepypasta. The story went that in the late 70s, a private contractor built a massive server farm and research facility inside a defunct coal mine. They said it was for long-term data retention for government agencies. Then, in 1994, the facility went dark. No layoffs, no liquidation auction, no security detail. The power was cut, the entrance was bulldozed, and the forest was allowed to reclaim the access road. I'm not an amateur. I've done the catacombs in Paris. I've slept in the radioactive ruins of Priapit. I know the risks: structural instability, black mold, squatters, asbestos. I packed for a 3-day excursion. I had my respirators, my climbing gear, high-lumen tactical lights, and enough SD cards to document a war. I parked my Jeep 5 miles out, hiking through dense rhododendron thickets that tore at my clothes like desperate fingers. Finding the entrance took 6 hours. It wasn't a gate or a door, it was a sinkhole. The heavy rains earlier in the week had washed away a section of the hillside, revealing a fractured slab of reinforced concrete and a twisted metal staircase spiraling into an abyss that smelled of wet iron and ozone. I rappelled down. The transition was instant. One moment, the humid warmth of a chaotic forest, the next, the sterile, frigid silence of dead industry. My boots hit the metal grating of a catwalk about 50 feet down. I clicked on my main torch, a 2,000-lumen tactical beast that could blind a bear. The beam cut through the dust motes, revealing a cavernous atrium. It looked like the inside of a rib cage. Massive steel arches supported the rock ceiling, and below me, the facility stretched down into the darkness. It was brutalist architecture met with subterranean madness. "Hello?" I called out. The echo didn't return immediately. It took a second, bouncing off the damp concrete walls, distorting my voice into a low, guttural moan. I began my descent. The upper levels 1 and 2, were standard administrative offices. It was the usual time capsule creepiness. Calendars stuck on October 1994, coffee mugs with mold cultures that had calcified into stone. But something was off. Usually in these places, you see signs of panic or a rushed exit. Papers on the floor, chairs overturned. Here, everything was pristine. Chairs were tucked in, files were neatly stacked, as if the rapture had happened during a lunch break. The silence was heavy. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a physical pressure pressing against my eardrums. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the linoleum and the rhythmic wheeze of my own breathing. I reached the security checkpoint for Level 3, Server Farm Alpha. The blast doors were open, jammed halfway by a thick black substance that looked like hardened tar. I assumed it was some kind of industrial sealant that had leaked over the decades. I squeezed through the gap, my jacket scraping against the black goo. It felt slick, oily. When I pulled away, a string of it clung to my sleeve. I wiped it off, noting a faint sweet smell, like rotting jasmine. Level 3 was where the architecture changed. The drywall offices were gone, replaced by endless corridors of server racks, tower after tower of beige computer monoliths, silent and dark. The floor here was graded, and beneath the mesh, I could see cables, thousands of them, snaking through the gloom like the intestines of a giant machine. I was photographing a row of magnetic tape reels. When I heard it, click, I froze. It was the sound of a relay switch, a mechanical, deliberate sound. I spun around, aiming my light down the corridor. Nothing but dust and shadows. "Is anyone there?" I shouted. Click. Whirr. Somewhere deep in the dark, a fan spun to life. It was impossible. The grid had been dead for 30 years. I checked my EMF meter. It was spiking like crazy.
The air suddenly felt charged, the hair on my arms standing up. I should have turned back then. That is the moment I replay in my nightmares. The moment where logic told me to run, but curiosity, that fatal human flaw, pushed me forward. I wanted to see what was powering up. I followed the sound. It led me to a central hub, a circular room with a glass observation deck overlooking a massive pit. In the center of the pit, suspended by heavy chains, was a sphere of black metal, about 20 feet in diameter. The cables from the floor all fed into it. The sphere was vibrating, a low frequency, barely audible but rattling my teeth. I entered the observation deck. There were terminals here, glowing with amber phosphorochromatin CRT light. They had turned themselves on. I approached the nearest console. The text scrolling across the screen was nonsensical, strings of binary, fragmented sentences, and biological data? Heart rate, 0, detected. Respiration, not applicable. Neural density, critical. I pulled out my camera, recording the screen. As I panned across the desk, I saw the logbook, bound in leather, stamped with the logo, Project Acheron. I opened it to the last entry. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, the pen tearing through the paper. October 14, 1944. It isn't a storage device. We didn't build a hard drive. We built a lure. The frequencies aren't storing data. They're calling something. Vane was right. The strata is permeable here. We opened the door, and the noise. Oh God, the noise. It's rewriting the calcium in our bones. I dropped the book. The vibration from the sphere was getting louder. It wasn't a mechanical hum anymore. It sounded like a choir, a million voices screaming in a whisper. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw the reflection in the observation glass. I wasn't alone. Standing in the doorway I'd just come through was a figure. It was humanoid, wearing the tattered remains of a lab coat, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down past the knees. The head was a blooming nightmare. Where a face should have been, the black tar I had seen earlier had erupted, hardening into a fungal-like crest that obscured the eyes and nose, leaving only a slack circular mouth filled with needle-like slivers of bone. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My vocal cords were paralyzed by a primal reptilian terror. The thing twitched. It moved with a jerky, stop-motion quality, joints popping audibly. It raised one of those elongated arms and pointed at the sphere in the pit. Listen. The voice didn't come from its mouth. It came from the speakers on the console next to me, a distorted digital synthesis of a human voice. I bolted. I threw my heavy flashlight at it. It struck the creature in the chest with a wet thud, but the thing didn't even flinch, and I sprinted for the secondary maintenance access door to my left. I scrambled into the stairwell, slamming the heavy steel door behind me and spinning the locking wheel. I heard the creature impact the door on the other side. Thud, thud. It wasn't trying to break it down. It was rhythmically banging, matching the frequency of the sphere. I ran up the stairs. I needed to get back to level 1. I needed the sky. But the stairs didn't go up. I ran for what felt like 10 minutes, my lungs burning, my legs pumping. I counted the landings. Level 4, level 5, level 6. I was going down. I stopped, hyperventilating, gripping the railing. The signs painted on the concrete walls were clear. I had started at level 3. I had climbed at least 20 flights of stairs. I should be on the roof, but the signs read level 9. The geometry of the place was shifting, the permeable strata the journal mentioned. The facility wasn't just a building, it was a digestive system, and I was being swallowed. The door to level 9 opened itself, slowly, the hinges screaming. I had no choice. The stairs below me had collapsed into a sheer drop, and the stairs above me were now blocked by a massive growth of that black organic coral. I stepped on to level 9. This wasn't a server farm. This was a nursery.
The hallway was lined with glass tanks, floor to ceiling. Inside them were people, or Things that used to be people. They were suspended in a translucent orange fluid. Cables were jacked directly into their skulls, their spines. But the cables weren't plastic and copper anymore. They were veins, pulsing, fleshy umbilicals that connected the floating bodies to the rusted metal of the facility. I walked down the aisle, my backup flashlight trembling in my hand. The subjects in the tanks were conscious. I could see their eyes darting rapidly, tracking me. Their mouths were covered by rebreathers, but I could hear them mumbling through the glass. Data, packet, received, upload, complete. The song is beautiful. They were part of the computer. The hive wasn't storing digital files. It was using human brains as processors to decode whatever signal that sphere was catching from the deep earth. At the end of the hall was a massive set of double doors labeled a mainframe interface. The doors were warped, bent outward as if something immense was pushing from the inside. I heard the sound again, the click, whir of the fan. It was coming from inside the mainframe room. And then, a voice. My voice. Hello? Is anyone there? It was a perfect recording of me entering the atrium an hour ago. I'm not an amateur, the voice mimicked, distorted and looped. I'm not. The doors groaned. The metal began to tear. I saw fingers, pale, giant fingers, grip the edges of the breach. I turned and ran back the way I came, but the hallway had changed. The glass tanks were gone. The walls were now made of that black, calcified fungus. It was breathing. The floor was soft, spongy, like stepping on rotting meat. I pulled out my climbing axe. I didn't care about structure or logic anymore. I attacked the wall to my right, where a ventilation grate was barely visible under the growth. I hacked at the mesh, tearing it open. I squeezed into the ductwork. It was tight, claustrophobic hell. I crawled on my belly, the dust and mold choking me. Below me, through the thin metal of the duct, I could hear footsteps, heavy, wet footsteps, and the sound of that digital voice reciting my own thoughts back to me before I even thought them. He is going to the vents. Subject Elias is attempting egress via ventilation shaft 4B. Intercept. I crawled faster, scraping my elbows raw. I saw light ahead. Daylight? No, it was too cold, too blue. I kicked the grate out and fell. I landed on a pile of dirt. I rolled, coughing, bringing my axe up in a defensive posture. I was outside, but I wasn't at the entrance. I was at the bottom of the sinkhole, looking up at the twisted staircase. The sky above was dark. Night had fallen. I had been inside for maybe 2 hours, but the stars said otherwise. The constellations were slightly shifted. I didn't question it. I attached my ascender to the rope I had left. I climbed. I climbed with the strength of a man who knows that death is nipping at his heels. As I neared the top, I looked down one last time. Standing on the catwalk, bathed in the blue light of the moon, was the figure in the lab coat. It was looking up at me. It raised a hand in a wave. And then, my phone, which had been dead in my pocket since I entered, rang. I froze, dangling 50 feet in the air. The ringtone echoed in the silence. It was the default ringtone, but it sounded slowed down, deep and demonic. I didn't answer it. I scrambled over the lip of the sinkhole, unclipped and ran. I ran through the rhododendrons, tearing my skin, losing my gear. I didn't stop until I reached my Jeep. I tore out of that forest, driving at dangerous speeds until I hit the paved highway. I've been driving for 3 days. I can't go home, because when I look in the mirror, I see it. Just for a split second, a flash of black tar in the whites of my eyes, and I can hear it, the hum. It's not in the facility anymore. It's in me. I am a node now. I am a processor. And the worst part? As I type this on my laptop in a motel room in Ohio, the text prediction is finishing my sentences for me, but it's predicting things I haven't thought of yet. It knows what I'm going to do. It just typed, I am going to the bathroom to open my veins to let the signal out. I don't want to do that. I don't. But my hand is reaching for the razor on the sink. It feels like a magnet. The signal must be broadcast. The hive must grow. If you find an abandoned place and it feels like the silence is watching you, run. Don't take pictures. Don't explore.
Just run. Because some places aren't abandoned. They are just waiting for new hardware.
The coordinates were sent to me on a secure channel, buried within the metadata of a corrupted JPEG file. That was the first red flag, of course. Legitimate architectural salvage jobs don't come encrypted. They come with permits, legal waivers, and a fat retainer check. This one came with a promise: the Olenya Guba Acoustic Research Facility, specifically the subterranean sectors, had been left untouched since the Soviet collapse in 1991. For an urban explorer and archivist of the macabre like me, Olenya Guba was the holy grail, a place wiped from maps, a ghost in the brutalist machine of Cold War history. I should have deleted the email. I should have stayed in my warm apartment in Helsinki, drinking coffee and editing photos of abandoned amusement parks. But the greed for the unseen is a sickness, and I was terminal. 3 days later, I was standing at the edge of the Kola Peninsula, staring at a concrete monolith half buried in the permafrost, the wind howling like a dying animal across the tundra. The structure wasn't just a building, it was a scar on the landscape, a massive, brutalist wedge of gray concrete jutting out of the snow, devoid of windows. The locals in the nearest village, 20 miles back, had refused to drive me closer. They called it the throat. They said the wind didn't blow past the facility, it was sucked into it. Standing there, adjusting the straps of my rucksack, I realized they were right. The silence here wasn't an absence of sound, it was a heavy, suffocating pressure, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I breached the perimeter fence easily. Rust had done the work of wire cutters years ago. The main blast doors were welded shut, a crude, hurried job that suggested they were trying to keep something in rather than keep people out. But I found a ventilation shaft on the northern face, the grate hanging by a single bolt. I slid into the darkness, the smell hitting me instantly. It didn't smell like rot or mold or stagnant water. It smelled like copper and ozone. It smelled like a thunderstorm trapped in a tomb. My headlamp cut a shivering beam through the gloom as I descended. The facility was structured like an inverted pyramid, digging deep into the granite of the earth. Level 1 was administrative, overturned desks, scattering of propaganda posters, the usual detritus of a panicked evacuation. But as I descended to Level 3, the architecture began to change. The sharp, utilitarian angles of Soviet construction softened. The corridors became circular, the walls lined with a strange, porous foam that crumbled at the touch. The floor plan made no sense, hallways that spiraled into dead ends, rooms with no doors, staircases that led to ceilings. I was looking for the main archive, according to the schematic I'd been sent, but what I found on Level 5 was far worse. It was a dormitory, rows of metal cots stripped bare, but on the walls, scratched into the concrete with desperate, manic intensity, were musical notations. Not just a few bars, but entire symphonies etched into the stone until the fingers that carved them must have been worn down to the bone. The notes were chaotic, discordant. I'm not a musician, but looking at them made my eyes water. The geometry of the staff lines was wrong. Spiraling, intersecting, impossible to play. It was on Level 7, the acoustic isolation sector, that I found the first body, or what was left of one. It wasn't a skeleton, it was mummified, preserved by the dry, recycled air. The figure was seated in a heavy steel chair in the center of a soundproof booth, but the disturbing part was the modification. A massive brass headset had been surgically fused to the skull. Drills had gone through the temporal bone. Cables ran from the headset into a console on the desk. The corpse's mouth was open in a silent scream, the jaw dislocated as if from a force of tremendous internal pressure. I checked the console. A reel-to-reel tape player sat there, ancient and dusted with frost. Against my better judgment, driven by that fatal curiosity, I pressed play. Static. Then a voice. A man speaking Russian, calm and clinical.
Subject 14. Exposure to frequency Delta 9. Time 0400 hours. Then a sound. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated in my teeth, a low, thrumming resonance that felt like it was coming from inside my own skull. On the tape, the man began to weep. Then the weeping turned to laughter. Then the laughter turned to a wet, tearing sound. I stopped the tape. My hands were shaking. The silence of the facility rushed back in, louder than before. I pushed deeper. Level 9 was the bottom. The air here was thick, heavy, and freezing. My breath hung in clouds that didn't dissipate, but seemed to linger, suspended. This was the heart of the facility, the echo chamber. The doors to the main hall were massive, lined with lead. They stood slightly ajar. I squeezed through, and my light died. Not the battery, the bulb simply shattered. I fumbled for my backup torch, the beam cutting through the pitch black. I was in a cavern, a natural geode inside the earth that had been smoothed and plated with metal panels. In the center of the room sat the machine. It was the size of a cathedral organ, a nightmare of brass pipes, vacuum tubes, and organic matter. This is the part I struggle to write down. This is the part that wakes me up at night, sweating and gasping for air. The strange thing wasn't just a machine. The pipes of the organ weren't pumping air. They were connected to vat-grown biological bellows, huge leathery sacs of lung tissue that expanded and contracted with a wet, rhythmic wheeze. The entire room smelled of formaldehyde and old blood, and wired into this machine, arranged in a semicircle around the central console, were jars, hundreds of them. Inside the jars were not specimens. They were vocal cords, excised larynxes suspended in nutrient gel, stripped from their owners but kept alive by wires and tubes pulsating with fluid. They were twitching.
I walked closer, horrified, unable to look away. The console was active. Amber lights blinked in the darkness. A single clipboard lay on the desk, covered in dust. I picked it up. The log was titled Project Orpheus. The entries were insane. Entry 44. The isolation of the soul frequency is successful. We have determined that consciousness is not biological, but acoustic. The body is merely an amplifier. When the body dies, the sound remains, but it has no medium to travel through. We have built the medium. Entry 89. We have tuned the choir. They're singing the song of the void. We can hear them. The dead. They are not at peace. They are screaming. As I read the words, a low hum began to emanate from the machine. The lung bellows heaved. The fluid in the jars began to bubble. The vocal cords, hundreds of them, tightened. I tried to run. I turned toward the heavy lead doors, but the sound hit me before I could take a step. It wasn't a noise. It was a physical blow, a wall of resonance that knocked me to the floor. My vision blurred. I tasted copper. The machine began to speak, not in words, but in a chorus of hundreds of stolen voices synthesized into a single, overwhelming tone. It was a chord of pure agony. I felt it in my marrow. The concrete floor beneath me began to crack, vibrating in sympathy with the frequency. The glass of the jars rattled. Then I saw it, the strange thing I had truly found. From the center of the brass organ, a panel slid open. Inside was a single, perfect glass cube. Suspended within it was not a body part, but a swirling black mist. It moved with purpose. It battered against the glass, reacting to the sound of the vocal cords. The mist was forming shapes, faces, hands. It was a receiver. The machine wasn't generating the sound. It was pulling it from somewhere else. It was a radio tuned to the frequency of death, and the black mist was the signal becoming physical. The mist pressed against the glass, and for a second, I saw a face I recognized. It was the man from the booth on level 7. He looked at me, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth opening to scream,
but the only sound was the drone of the machine. The glass cube began to fracture. A hairline crack appeared, spiderwebbing outward. The sound grew louder, rising in pitch until it was a shriek that threatened to liquefy my brain. I scrambled backward, clawing at the floor, my fingernails tearing against the cold metal. I didn't stand up. I couldn't. I crawled. I crawled out of the echo chamber, the sound pursuing me like a physical predator. I crawled through the corridor, blood leaking from my nose and ears. I hauled myself up the stairs, flight after flight, the facility shaking around me as the resonance destabilized the very foundations of the earth. I don't remember breaching the surface. I remember the cold wind of the tundra hitting my face, shocking me back to consciousness. I remember stumbling through the snow, falling, getting up and falling again, until the gray monolith of the throat was just a dark smudge against the horizon. I made it back to the village. I left my camera. I left my recorder. I brought nothing back but the ringing in my ears. Doctors tell me I have severe tinnitus. They say I have nerve damage, but they don't understand. It's not tinnitus. When the room is quiet, when the wind dies down, I can hear it faintly but clearly. I can hear the choir. I can hear the wet slap of the lung bellows. And I know that somewhere, deep under the ice of the Kola Peninsula, the machine is still running. The glass cube has shattered, and whatever was inside is listening.
I am writing this because the silence is no longer enough to keep me safe. I used to seek it out. I used to crave the dead, heavy quiet of places the world had forgotten. I am, or I was, an urban explorer. Not the kind who breaks into abandoned Walmarts to spray graffiti, but the kind who spends months researching geological surveys, cross-referencing Cold War declassified documents, and hiking for days into the unforgiving wilderness to find a specific set of rusted coordinates. I've breathed the asbestos dust of Chernobyl's outskirts. I've walked the flooded missile silos of the Dakotas. But nothing prepared me for the Kafkaesque nightmare of the St. Jude Acoustical Research Station. It began, as these things often do, with a rumor, a thread on a private forum buried deep within the dark web's architecture, spoke of a facility in the remote Canadian Shield, north of Superior, where the granite is old enough to have seen the birth of continents. The thread didn't call it a research station. The user, who went by the handle Echolocator, called it the Throat. The coordinates led to a spot 40 miles from the nearest logging road. I packed for a week, dried rations, high-end climbing gear, a Geiger counter, and my camera, a battered Sony A7S III that could see in the dark better than I could. The trek was brutal. The boreal forest is dense and unforgiving, a tangle of spruce and muskeg that fights you for every step. But on the third day, the trees broke. There was no fence, no keep out signs, just a massive, concrete, brutalist structure jutting out of the Canadian granite like a tombstone for a giant. It was a ventilation tower, easily 5 stories tall, stained with black lichen. Around it lay the remains of a perimeter, rusted wire crushed by decades of snowfall. The silence here was different. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was a pressure. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I found the entrance half buried in a landslide of shale, a heavy steel blast door, remarkably uncorroded. It wasn't locked. That should have been my first warning. These places are always sealed, welded shut by the government or chained up by the owners. But the wheel turned with a screech that tore through the clearing, startling a flock of ravens into the gray sky. I stepped inside, clicking on my heavy-duty flashlight. The beam cut through swirling dust motes, revealing a long, descending corridor lined with acoustic foam. Not the cheap egg crate stuff you buy online. This was industrial-grade, thick black wedges that seemed to swallow the light as much as the sound. The air smelled of ozone and something copper-sharp. Old blood or just rusting iron? I descended. The ramp spiraled down, seemingly endlessly. My footsteps made no sound.
The foam on the walls, ceiling, and even the floor absorbed everything. It was disorienting. I could feel the impact of my boots, but I couldn't hear them. It created a disconnect between my body and my senses, a vertigo that made me nauseous. According to the papers I'd found later in the administrative wing, St. Jude was built in 1968. It was a joint venture between a private acoustics firm and a shell company funded by DARPA. Their stated goal was the isolation and preservation of transient sonic phenomena, a fancy way of saying they wanted to record things. But as I explored the upper levels, the mess hall, the dormitories, I realized the scale of the operation was wrong. There were beds for 300 people. The kitchen was industrial. This wasn't a lab. It was a colony. The strange thing wasn't in the living quarters. Those were mundane in their creepiness. Calendars stopped in November 1974, coffee mugs with mold rings, half-written letters home complaining about the hum in the walls. No, the true horror lay beneath, in Sector 4. To get to Sector 4, I had to rappel down a maintenance shaft because the elevators were fused to the walls by some kind of hardened, resinous substance. As I descended into the dark, the temperature dropped. The smell changed. The metallic tang was replaced by the scent of formaldehyde and vinegar. I touched down on a metal grating. The flashlight beam revealed a cavernous space, a natural cavern system that had been reinforced with steel and glass. But it was the walls that made me freeze. They weren't concrete. They were lined with shelves, thousands of them, floor to ceiling, stretching into the gloom. I walked closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. A sound that, down here, seemed deafeningly loud inside my own skull. The shelves were filled with glass jars, specimen jars. I wiped the dust from one. Inside, floating in a yellowed viscous fluid, was a human ear. I recoiled, nearly dropping my camera. I shone the light down the row. Ears, thousands of them. Left ears, right ears, large, small. Some were ragged, torn from the skull. Others were surgically precise removals. Each jar had a label with a date, a frequency code, and a name. Subject 1045. Date December 4th, 1971. Frequency 45 Hertz. I moved deeper into the archive. The ears gave way to other things. Larynxes, vocal cords suspended like jellyfish, tongues pinned to corkboards inside dry-sealed boxes. It was a museum of speech and hearing, harvested from whom? I found the answer in the control room, a glass-walled observation deck overlooking the main cavern. The equipment here was archaic but sophisticated. Massive reel-to-reel tape decks, oscilloscopes, and a mixing board the size of a church organ. On the desk sat a logbook. The leather cover was brittle. I opened it. Dr. Eris Thorne, Chief Acoustician, entry 450. The organic medium is superior to magnetic tape. We have proven it. Flesh remembers. The trauma of the excision locks the sound into the cellular structure. We can play them back. We can hear the truth of the final moment. I felt sick. They weren't just studying sound. They were using human tissue as a recording medium. They believed that the biological mechanism of hearing and speaking could store data better than technology. But the most disturbing find was yet to come. Beyond the control room, a thick bundle of cables ran along the floor, thick as a python, pulsing slightly. I followed them. They led to a massive circular blast door labeled the Resonance Chamber. The door was slightly ajar. I squeezed through. The room was a sphere, perhaps 50 feet across. The walls were lined not with foam, but with a wet, pulsing material. I shone my light on it. It was skin. Patches of human skin stretched tight over the metal frame of the room. It was warm.
In the center of the room stood a device. It looked like a phonograph, but the horn was made of bone. Ribs and femurs fused together, and on the spindle, where a record should be, was a gray, squishy mass. A brain, a human brain, flattened into a disc. A needle, sharp and silver, hovered over it. I should have run.
Every instinct in my primate brain screamed at me to leave, to climb back up the shaft and never look back. But the explorer in me, the part that needs to know, pushed me forward. I saw a switch on the console next to the device. It was labeled Playback, Composite Scream. My hand trembled as I reached out. Why? Why did I do it? Maybe I didn't believe it would work. Maybe I thought the power was dead. I flipped the switch. The hum was immediate, a low, thrumming vibration that I felt in my teeth. The skin on the walls rippled. The bone horn quivered. The needle dropped onto the gray matter. It wasn't a sound. It was an invasion. The scream didn't come from the horn. It appeared inside my head. It was the sound of 1,000 people dying at once. It was a choir of agony, a dissonant chord of pure terror that bypassed my ears and struck my auditory cortex directly. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, screaming to match the sound, but I couldn't hear my own voice. And then, the skin on the walls began to sweat. The patches of flesh flushed red, veins bulged beneath the surface. The room was reacting to the memory of the pain. And then I saw it. In the corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest, the skin wall tore open. Not a rip, but an opening, a sphincter, and something pulled itself out. It was a man, or it had been. He was skinless, raw muscle and weeping fascia. He had no eyes, no nose, just a massive, gaping mouth that took up half his face. His fingers were long, spindly, ending in bone probes. He didn't walk. He slid across the floor, leaving a trail of wet slime. He was the curator, the one who changed the records. I scrambled back, kicking at the floor, my flashlight spinning wildly. The beam caught it as it reached the console. It didn't attack me. It ignored me completely. It reached out with those bone fingers and gently, lovingly lifted the needle from the brain. The screaming stopped instantly. The silence returned, heavier than before. The curator turned its head toward me. It had no eyes, but I felt its gaze. The mouth opened, widening impossibly, and a sound came out. It wasn't a roar. It was a recording. It was my own voice. "Hello? Is anyone down here?" It was the words I had spoken when I first entered the facility 3 hours ago. Then it spoke again in my own voice. Oh God, please no." Those were words I hadn't said yet. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just playing back the past, it was recording the future. It knew what I was going to say because in this room, time was just another frequency to be manipulated. I ran. I don't remember the climb up the shaft. I don't remember the scramble through the dark corridors. I remember the sound of wet, slapping footsteps behind me, always just out of sight. I remember the wheezing laughter that echoed from the walls, the laughter of the walls themselves. I burst out into the cold Canadian air, collapsing into the snow. The sun was rising, a blinding, beautiful white. I lay there for an hour, shivering, waiting for the skinless thing to emerge. It never did. I made it back to my car. I drove for 20 hours straight. I burned the memory card. I destroyed the camera. I told the forums I found nothing but an empty mine. But I can't escape it. Sometimes, when it's very quiet in my apartment, I can hear a hum. I checked the fridge, the radiator, the electronics. It's none of them. Yesterday, I cut myself shaving. I stared at the blood, at the flap of skin, and for a second, I saw it ripple. And then, from the silence of my empty living room, I heard my own voice, clear as day, whispering from the corner, "You didn't leave alone." I am writing this because I need to meet a record, not on flesh, but on paper. Digital text, something that can't bleed. If you find coordinates for St. Jude, if you hear rumors of the throat, don't go. The silence there isn't empty. It's full, and it's hungry for new recordings.
I used to tell people that I explored abandoned buildings for the history. I'd talk about the thrill of preservation, the archaeological significance of rust and rot, the way a crumbling asylum tells a story that a textbook never could. That was a lie. The truth is, I did it for the silence. In a world that never shuts up, there is a specific, heavy frequency of quiet that only exists in places where people have died and the living have forgotten to return. It is a narcotic, that silence. But like any drug, the dosage eventually stops working, and you have to go deeper, darker, and further to get the same high. That addiction is what led me to the Kalima Institute. You won't find it on Google Maps. You won't find it on the curated Urbex forums where teenagers trade coordinates for likes. I found the reference in a box of water-damaged estate documents I bought at an auction in rural Idaho, a set of blueprints, and a series of letters from a frantic architect to a private holding company, dated 1974. The location was deep in the Bitterroot Mountains, miles from the nearest logging road, buried in a valley that the locals superstitiously avoided. The letters described a facility designed for extreme behavioral modification and biological theological research. The last letter simply read, "The geometry is wrong. It breathes." It took me 3 days to hike in. The forest grew denser the closer I got, the pine needles creating a carpet so thick it swallowed the sound of my footsteps. By the time the trees broke, giving way to the massive concrete scar of the Institute, the sun was already dipping below the peaks, casting long, bruised shadows across the valley. The building was brutalist architecture at its most hostile, a jagged concrete fortress emerging from the mountainside like a gray tumor. There were no windows on the ground floor, only narrow slits on the upper levels that looked like squinting eyes. The front gates were welded shut, fused by time and rust, but I found a drainage pipe on the southern perimeter that had collapsed, leaving a muddy, gaping maw leading into the sub-basement. I slid inside. The air temperature dropped 20 degrees instantly. The smell hit me first. Usually, these places smell of wet rot, mildew, and rat droppings. Kalima smelled of copper and ozone. It smelled like a thunderstorm trapped in a slaughterhouse. I clicked on my heavy-duty flashlight, the beam cutting through dust motes that hung suspended in the air, motionless, as if time itself had stopped circulation. I was in a maintenance tunnel. Pipes ran along the ceiling, wrapped in decaying asbestos insulation that looked like shedding snakeskin. I made my way up a service stairwell, my boots crunching on broken glass and dead insects. I emerged into what must have been the reception area. The silence here was aggressive. It pressed against my eardrums. The front desk was overturned. Papers were scattered everywhere. Not just scattered, but shredded, as if a whirlwind had materialized indoors. I began to document. I snapped photos of the peeling paint, the way the linoleum curled up from the floor like dead leaves. But the first strange thing I found wasn't the architecture. It was the shoes. In the main hallway leading to the patient ward A, there was a pile of shoes. Hundreds of them. Sneakers, loafers, heels, children's boots. They weren't thrown into a heap. They were arranged, perfectly aligned in concentric circles facing inward towards a central point on the floor where the tile had been scorched black. I knelt to photograph them. The leather was stiff, ancient. But looking closer, I saw the laces. The laces of each shoe were tied to the laces of the next, creating a massive, unbreakable web. Who had done this? Squatters? A cult? Or the patients? In some final collective moment of madness, I touched a small red boot near the center. It was warm, not room temperature warm, body heat warm. I recoiled, sweeping my light around the dark hallway. Nothing, just the dust and the dark mouths of open doorways. I pressed on, moving to the second floor. This was the administrative wing. I found the director's office, a heavy oak door hanging off its top hinge. Inside, the desk was a chaotic mess of files. I picked one at random. Subject 402, transformation progression 14%. Rejection of the graft is minimal. Subject complains of the singing in the walls. I found a reel-to-reel tape player on the side table, rusted but intact. Beside it sat a single spool labeled Incident Log 11-12-79. My hands were shaking, though I told myself it was just the cold. I threaded the tape. The mechanism groaned, the wheels spun, and a crackled voice into the stagnant air. It wasn't a clinical voice. It was a man weeping. We were wrong. It wasn't a frequency. It was a spore. We brought it up from the deep shaft. We thought we could use it to rewrite trauma, to eat the bad memories out of the brain tissue.
But it doesn't stop at the memories. It eats the names. It eats the shape of the bones. Sarah is part of the wall now. She's spread out across the plaster in room 302. She's still talking to me. Oh God, the whole building is talking. The tape cut to static, then a sound that made my stomach drop, a wet, tearing noise like meat separating from bone, followed by a heavy, wet thud. I stopped the player. The silence rushed back in, louder than before. Room 302. I had to know. The third floor was different. The air here was humid, almost tropical. The paint wasn't peeling, it was bubbling. Large, bulbous blisters distorted the walls. I walked down the corridor, my flashlight beam shaking. The floor was slick with a translucent slime. I reached room 302. The number plate was tarnished, barely readable. The door was closed. I gripped the handle. It was wet. I pushed the door open. The room was empty of furniture, but the walls were textured. I stepped inside, raising my light. The plaster had grown outward in complex fungal ridges. It looked like coral, or perhaps brain tissue magnified 1,000 times. I moved closer. The ridges formed patterns, spirals, fractals, and then I saw it. Embedded in the north wall, fused seamlessly with the masonry, was a jawbone, human. It wasn't stuck in the wall had grown through it. Above it, the curvature of a brow ridge. To the left, a hand, the fingers elongated and stretched like taffy, merging into the crown molding. The tape wasn't a metaphor. Sarah was part of the wall. And then the wall moved.
A slow, rhythmic expansion. Inhale, exhale. The entire room was a lung. I stumbled back, my boots slipping in the slime. I hit the door frame and scrambled out into the hall, gasping for air that didn't taste like copper and meat. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of this valley and burn these clothes and never look at a dark window again. But the layout had changed. I ran toward the stairwell I had come up, but it was gone. In its place was a smooth, uninterrupted wall of gray concrete, pulsing gently. I spun around. The hallway stretched infinitely in both directions, longer than the building could possibly be. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. I ran the other way, checking doors. Room 304, room 305, room 306. They were all open, and inside each one, the walls were thick with them. Faces stretched wide in silent screams, torsos twisted into pillars, legs serving as support beams for the ceiling. The institute wasn't abandoned. It was full. I ran until my lungs burned, turning corners that shouldn't exist, descending ramps that spiraled deeper into the earth and the sub-basement. I was in the deep shaft mentioned on the tape. The architecture became less human, more organic. The concrete was soft, yielding to the touch. The lights of my flashlight flickered, the batteries dying faster than they should. I found myself in a massive circular chamber, an amphitheater. In the center, below a gallery of rusted observation windows, was a pit. The smell here was overpowering, a sweetness like rotting orchids and formaldehyde. I walked to the railing of the gallery and looked down. This is the image that will be burned onto the back of my eyelids until the day I die. This is the thing found in the dark that defies sanity. The pit was filled with a single, massive organism, a heart. A colossal beating heart made of thousands of fused human bodies. It was the size of a house. I could see individual limbs, faces, and eyes surfacing and sinking into the wet, red mass as it throbbed. Veins as thick as tree trunks ran from the mass into the walls of the building, pumping a bioluminescent fluid upwards. This wasn't a hospital. It was a feeder, a farm, and standing at the edge of the pit, looking up at me, was a figure. It was wearing the tattered remains of a lab coat. Its face was a void of swirling fungal matter, but it held a clipboard. It raised a hand, pointing at me. My flashlight died. Total darkness. But in the dark, I could see. The bioluminescence from the veins on the walls cast a sickly green glow, and I could hear, not silence anymore, 1,000 whispers overlapping, a cacophony of lost souls. Join us. The geometry is perfect. We are together.
No more pain, no more silence. I don't remember how I got out. I remember running blindly in the dark, guided by sheer terror. I remember falling down a chute, sliding through muck and bones and splashing into the freezing water of the drainage pipe. I crawled out into the night air, vomiting onto the pine needles. I hiked for 3 days without stopping, bleeding, dehydrated, raving. I burned the blueprints. I burned the photos. But I couldn't burn the memory, and I can't get rid of the infection. It started on my left hand 3 days ago. A small patch of skin that turned gray and hard, like concrete. It's not a callus. I cut it with a razor, and it didn't bleed. It released a puff of spores. Yesterday, I heard a voice coming from the drywall in my apartment. It sounded like Sarah. I'm writing this as a warning. If you find coordinates for the Kalima Institute, burn them. If you see a building that isn't on the map, turn around. Some places aren't abandoned. They're just waiting for fresh material. The gray patch is spreading up my arm now. It feels warm. It feels peaceful. I think I'm going to lie down against the wall. It looks so soft today, so inviting. I just want to rest. I just want to be part of the structure.
I've been an urban explorer, a ruin hunter for 15 years. I've breathed in the asbestos dust of Detroit's crumbling ballrooms, walked the radiation-silent streets of Pripyat, and slept in the rusted husk of a Soviet submarine beached in Vladivostok. I thought I had calluses on my soul thick enough to withstand anything. I've seen dead bodies, drug dens, and altars to gods that shouldn't exist. But what I found in the Bitterroot Mountains, miles off the grid in a place scrubbed from every map since 1974, wasn't just abandoned, it was waiting. The coordinates came from a dead man. His name was Arthur Vane, a fellow explorer I knew only through encrypted forums on the deep web. Vane was legendary for finding the black spots, places where the geometry of the world felt wrong. He stopped posting 3 months ago. Then a package arrived at my P.O. box. No return address, just a rusted key, a topographical map of Montana with a red circle drawn in a valley that shouldn't exist, and a note written in a shaky, frantic scrawl. It's not empty. It never was. Don't let them hear you breathe. I should have burned the map. Instead, I packed my gear, respirator, Geiger counter, climbing ropes, and 3 backup flashlights, and drove north. The hike in took 2 days. The forest around the target zone was ancient, a dense tangle of pine and fir that seemed to swallow sound. By the second afternoon, the birds stopped singing. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was a sudden, violent silence, as if nature had been switched off at the mains. That was the first sign. The second was the smell. It didn't smell like rot or decay, which I was used to. It smelled like copper and ozone, the scent of a thunderstorm trapped inside a slaughterhouse. I broke through the tree line and saw it, the facility. It didn't have a name on the map, but the rusted archway over the main road read Ethelgard Institute for Geological and Biological Research. It was a brutalist nightmare of concrete and steel jutting out of the mountainside like a malignant tumor. It was 10 stories high, windowless, with a massive ventilation tower that hummed with a vibration I could feel in my teeth. I checked my Geiger counter. Normal background radiation. I checked the air quality. Clean. I pulled my respirator on anyway. Paranoia keeps you alive in this hobby. The front doors were welded shut. That was unusual. Usually, looters pry them open within a decade. These welds were professional, industrial grade, and done from the outside. Whoever closed this place didn't want anyone getting in. Sure, but the heavy crossbars suggested they were far more concerned with things getting out. I found a service vent on the eastern flank, rusted through just enough to squeeze into. The air inside was stagnant, cold and dry. I dropped into a hallway tiled in checkered linoleum, the classic institutional green and white. My boots crunched on glass, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. I clicked on my primary torch, a high-lumen tactical beam that sliced through the dark. This is where the strange things began. In most abandoned places, you find chaos. Graffiti, smashed furniture, beer cans, water damage, entropy. But Ethelgard was pristine. The reception desk had a stack of papers perfectly aligned. A coffee mug sat on a coaster,
The liquid inside evaporated to a black ring, but the mug itself was dust-free. The calendar on the wall was turned to November 1974. I moved deeper, sweeping the beam into the offices lining the main corridor. In the director's office, I found the first item that made my stomach turn. It was a collection of shoes. Not in a closet, but arranged in a perfect spiral in the center of the room. Hundreds of them. Men's work boots, children's sneakers, nurses' heels. I knelt to examine them. They were fused together. The rubber soles had melted and merged, creating a single spiraling organism of leather and canvas. But there was no sign of fire. It looked like they had grown into each other. I moved to the stairwell. The elevator doors were pry-barred open, revealing a shaft that went down into an abyss the flashlight couldn't penetrate. I dropped a glow stick. It fell for 12 seconds before hitting bottom. 12 seconds. That meant the basement levels went deeper than the building was tall. I decided to clear the upper floors first. 4th floor, residential. This place wasn't just a lab. People lived here. The doors to the dormitories were open. In room 402, I found a diary on a bedside table. It belonged to a woman named Clara. The entry started normal. Complaints about the food, the isolation, the strict curfews. But around October 1974, the handwriting changed. It became jagged, angular. "The walls are breathing," she wrote on October 12th. "They took Miller to the lower levels. He came back, but his face is wrong. His eyes are upside down. The humming won't stop. It's rewriting my DNA. I can feel my bones itching." The last entry wasn't words, it was a drawing. A hyper-realistic sketch of a human rib cage, but the ribs were opened like a flower, and inside, instead of lungs, there was a complex geometric structure, a dodecahedron of black stone. The paper was stiff, brittle. I touched it and realized it wasn't paper. It was dried skin. I dropped the book, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed to leave. I turned to the door, but the hallway had changed. I swear to God, it was longer. The perspective was stretched, like looking through a fisheye lens. The doors to the other rooms were further apart. "Just fear," I whispered. "Just panic." I forced myself to continue. I needed to document this. If I came back empty-handed, no one would believe the skin book. I went to the laboratories on the 8th floor. This is where I found the specimen bank. Rows of industrial fridges, the glass fogged with 40 years of grime. I wiped a porthole clean. Inside were jars. Standard medical preservation, but the things inside. One jar contained a human hand, severed at the wrist, but the fingers were too long, possessing too many joints. They were pressed against the glass. As I watched, the index finger twitched. Just a millimeter. I froze. Muscle memory? Galvanic reaction? No, the liquid in the jar swirled. The hand flexed, the palm pressing flat against the glass as if trying to push through. It was alive. After 40 years in formaldehyde, it was alive. I backed away, bumping into a metal trolley. The noise was deafening. Then I heard it. A sound from the ventilation duct. Scritch, scritch, thump. Something heavy was moving in the ceiling, moving fast. I ran. I didn't care about documenting anymore. I bolted for the stairwell. I hit the landing and grabbed the railing to swing myself down, but my hand recoiled in wet disgust. The railing wasn't metal anymore. It was bone, long fused vertebrae coated in a slick, clear mucus. I shone my light down the stairwell. The stairs were gone. The concrete steps had been replaced by a sloping, fleshy ramp that pulsed with a rhythmic wet beat. Veins thick as fire hoses ran along the walls, pumping a bioluminescent fluid that cast a sickly purple glow. The building wasn't abandoned. The building was the organism. Aethelgard was eating itself, digesting the concrete and steel and replacing it with biomass. I couldn't go down. I had to go up. The roof. Maybe I could rappel down the exterior. I scrambled up the bone stairs, my boots slipping on the slime. The sound in the vents was getting louder, a wet, gurgling vocalization that sounded like a drowning man trying to laugh. I burst through onto the roof access level, the 10th floor. The door to the roof was jammed. I kicked it, slammed my shoulder against it. It wouldn't budge. I looked at the lock. It wasn't rusted. It was fused with calcified growth, like coral made of teeth. I was trapped. The ventilation grate behind me exploded outward. I spun around, beam high.
It unfolded from the ductwork like a spider made of human limbs. It was a mass of arms and legs, fused at impossible angles, moving with a jerky stop-motion horror. In the center of the mass was a face. It was Arthur Vane, my friend, the one who sent the map. His eyes were gone, replaced by black, weeping hollows. His mouth was stitched shut with wire, but I could hear him screaming from somewhere inside his chest cavity. "Joe," a voice whispered. It didn't come from Vane. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. I ran back into the corridor. The geography was shifting. Rooms were rearranging themselves. I saw a door labeled security control. I threw myself inside and barricaded the door with a heavy filing cabinet. The room was filled with monitors. Surprisingly, they were on. Static fuzz mostly, but one screen was clear. It showed the front entrance, the welded doors I had seen earlier, except they weren't welded anymore. They were open, and standing there, looking up at the camera, was me, entering the building. I looked at the timestamp. It was live. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. I looked back at the screen. The me on the screen walked into the lobby. He stopped. He looked directly into the security camera and smiled. His teeth were needle sharp. Then the power in the room cut. Absolute darkness. I heard the filing cabinet slide away from the door, not pushed from the outside, pulled. The metal screamed against the floor. I scrambled into the corner, fumbling for my flares. I popped the cap and struck it. The red magnesium light flared to life, sizzling and blinding. The room was empty, but the walls were covered in faces. Hundreds of them, plaster-cast faces emerging from the drywall, mouths open in silent screams. And in the center of the room, standing where the filing cabinet had been, was a pedestal. On it sat a tape recorder. It was playing. "Day 1, my own voice said from the speaker. "I've found the entrance. It's magnificent." "Day 4, my voice continued. "I don't need to eat anymore. The walls provide." Day 12, my voice distorted, deepening. "We are beautiful. We are structural." I smashed the recorder with my flashlight. It shattered, plastic shards skittering across the floor. I needed to get out. The window. I was on the 10th floor, but I had rope. I grabbed a chair and smashed the reinforced glass. It cracked. I hit it again. It shattered outward. The wind hit me. Cold mountain air. Freedom. I tied my line to a heavy radiator pipe. I didn't trust it, but I had no choice. I clipped in and threw the coil out. I climbed onto the sill. I looked down. There was no ground. The mountain was gone. The forest was gone. Below me, stretching out to the horizon, an endless expanse of gray, writhing flesh, a landscape of skin and muscle, hills made of heaving chests, valleys of open wounds. The sky wasn't blue or black. It was the interior of a rib cage, massive curved bones arching overhead, blocking out the stars. Æthelgard wasn't a building on a mountain. Æthelgard was a cancerous growth on a world that had died a long time ago. Or maybe I had climbed inside something the moment I squeezed through that vent. The radiator pipe groaned. It was pulling away from the wall, not breaking, stretching. The metal turned to sinew. The rope turned to a long, fibrous intestine. I tried to climb back in, but the window was shrinking. The glass shards were turning into teeth. The building was healing the wound I had made. I fell. I didn't fall far. Something caught me. A net of sticky, wet webbing. I hung there, suspended in the gray void, swaying. Then the lights came on. Not floodlights. Eyes. Millions of them, opening on the surface of the flesh landscape below. They were all looking at me. They were all Arthur Vane's eyes. And then the landscape spoke. It didn't use sound. It used gravity. It pulled at my blood, my marrow. It demanded integration. I'm typing this on a laptop I found in the webbing. It has battery. It has a connection somehow. I don't know who receives this. I don't know if the internet is real anymore. My legs are gone. They didn't fall off. They merged with the web. I can feel the pulse of the facility beating in my own femoral arteries. I can feel the thoughts of the others. Clara from 1974, the man with the shoes, Vane,
They're all here. We are an archive. We are a museum of the lost. If you find coordinates for the Bitterroot Mountains, if you find a key in the mail, don't burn them. Come find us. It's lonely being a monument. We need fresh exhibits. The shoes are waiting. The walls are hungry. And I have such wonderful things to show you.